Okay, good morning, everybody. Apologize for being a little bit late. The co-chairs had a meeting with LSO when we walked through with LSO staff attorneys and with Mr. Richards' various constitutional or other statutory issues of the budget, which is a regular process that we do every time we have a budget. And we just ran over a little bit in that presentation, so sorry to keep everybody waiting. With that, could we do a roll call, please?
Good morning, members of the committee. Representative Henderson. Here. Representative Larson. Here. Representative Sherwood. Representative Stiff.
Here.
Representative Walters.
Here.
Representatives Wanniser Dave. Here. Senator Anderson.
Here.
Senator Guru.
Here.
Senator Kinski.
Here.
Senator Salazar.
Here.
Madam Co-Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. And just to refresh everyone's memory, what our schedule will be today. The first item on the agenda was we'll do a page turn walk agency by agency through the draft budget that LSO has crafted. It's roughly 144 pages. And it'll just be an explanation of all the work, the accumulation of all the work we've done in the last 2 months, all total of roughly 4 weeks of work. Probably about 10 weeks of work or plus for all of our friends in front of us who do all the work. And then once typically this process lasts anywhere between 2 to 3 hours to get through this budget and the explanation of it. Once we complete that and have questions answered, then we'll recess. And then during that recess, we will hope to meet informally with the Senate, talk a little bit about the processes, and have just discussions about the amendments and what will happen probably this afternoon after 1 o'clock. We will also have a presentation informally, which will be off the record, from some staff members, just walking through capital costs. So Wendy and Rihanna will be here to kind of just run through the numbers and all the things that are happening around the Capitol that need money or where we're expending money, just so the committee has an update on that process and the direction of that process. So,
Mr. Co-Chairman, if I may, a lot of this information is new for the Senate that is hearing a lot of the plan for the day for the first time now. So I'm not sure much of the Senate or a quorum of the Senate will be available for some of the efforts that might be occurring beyond what was scheduled for the agenda.
I'm not quite sure what was just said.
So, Madam Chairman, this is the agenda that I sent out to you and to all of the appropriations members. And so we'll proceed, and if they can't attend, we'll do our best for them to participate. Okay, with that, Don, please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. First of all, you do have a bill draft before you, 24 LSO 0491, committee formal draft 1.0. This is perhaps a little bit different than many of the draft bills that are before you. This is our best attempt to take roughly 240 conceptual motions and incorporate your intent into narrative. So if we miss the mark, this is a great opportunity for you to tell us that. In addition, staff have, I believe, 10 items that we want to bring to your attention where we're not sure if we interpreted it correctly, or in a couple of cases, we clearly took some literary privilege, which may or may not align with the expectations of the committee. Additionally, I would mention that this is obviously not the final draft. It is missing the titles. We recognize that. So the final bill will have general funds, federal funds, other funds in the headers of all of the pages. In addition, we also know that the pagination is off. We will not be splitting tables in the final bill. This is truly an early draft. So the final draft that goes to your colleagues will certainly be in final form. You can take the corrective or staff suggestions amendments either as I walk through the bill or at the end when you do your consideration of any amendments. It's entirely your choice, but I'll at least raise them for your consideration. So,
Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, what's your pleasure on that? Is do you want us to attend their, address their staff changes as we go through the bill, or wait to the end?
No, I think the most efficient way is to do it as we do the page turn, but section by section.
Okay, thank you.
with that, Mr. Chairman, the first page is the long title of the bill. It provides a notice to the public for all of the provisions that are included in the bill. And you will see some of this varies from prior years. For example, we are more specific as to the length of the biennium when it is commencing and ending, the date of the current biennium, completion of June 30th, 2024. We also highlight that we are amending and repealing prior appropriations because this does have some challenging appropriations that are
Could you get a
amending
little
prior
closer to your
law.
mic?
Excuse me, challenging appropriations that are amending prior law. And we also do have some notifications and reports related to these appropriations that are called out, as well as a continuation of an account. In section 1, which is the definition section on pages 2 through 4, I would bring your attention to a handful of new funds that have not been included in the budget in prior years. Specifically on page 3, line 22, S14 is a brand new fund. It is the Wyoming Tourism Account. And also for you and your colleagues on page 3, line 13, because of the consolidation between the school capital construction account and the school foundation account, you will see a duplicative title for the school foundation program account or the public school foundation program account. And I believe this might be ripe for either a reviser's bill next year or action by the committee. There are 27 instances of this account being called the school foundation program account in statute, and 25 instances where it is called the public school foundation program account. It's just a technical point there. Beginning on the bottom of page 4, this is the heart of the bill. This is each agency in agency number order. And for purposes of the committee, I will bring your attention to the changes that you made, both numerically, and then walk through the footnote language as well. So the first change of this committee appeared on page 3, Homeland Security. I believe this was the Senator Salazar amendment, $20,000 addition for the in-person meeting for CERT. Yes, page 5, line 3.
Yeah, you said page 4.
Oh,
There you go.
apologies. Page 5, line 3. $20,000 for the in-person meeting. That is further described in footnote number 4, and I will go through the footnotes individually. There is another adjustment on line 3 for $800,000. I believe this was the Representative Stith amendment for $800,000 for BRIC. And then finally, the last change was the $1 million, again on line 4 for FNRPA. That $1 million general fund is referenced again in footnote number 6. Those are the 3 numeric changes to this agency by JAC. Now I'll proceed through the footnotes. The first footnote, and I'll give a little bit of.
Is there a question? Senator Group.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, just before we go on too much farther, I'm sorry, you just laid out a schedule for the day that I really didn't anticipate. And so I read the thing that says we're done at 12:30, and all the discussions we've had, this is I-dotting and T-crossing, and this is what we're gonna do. I know we have a number of things to go through. but you just laid out an entire day agenda, and I just wanted to just try to get a sense of what changed, what are we up to here? Sorry, just don't know. I just need a little help. Thank you.
So to answer that, Senator Guru, this process we knew takes at least usually 2.5 to 3 hours. That takes us to roughly either 11 or 11:30. Then we have amendments. And typically what we like to do is prior to going through the amendments, have an informal, essentially meeting with the joint bodies, walk through what those amendments are, and get feedback and input from both sides of the body. There's roughly, I think, 39 or 40 amendments all told. And so in order to facilitate the process and to work in a cooperative fashion, our plan was to go through those amendments informally. And then as soon as we're done doing that, we'll come back before in the public and do the round robin vote on all of the amendments that we review. So that's essentially the agenda. All right, Don, go ahead.
Members of the committee, let me also
And
mention.
so I
two-
just, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, I have to add my concerns as well. I planned my day out based on the original agenda, so I'm out of here, at the original meeting end time. I've got other commitments, so I'm sorry for that, but I relied on the agenda as published.
Well, we'll do our best.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, feel free to interrupt. I will try to expedite my comments as well. If I'm not answering your questions, please do interrupt me, but I will try to proceed expeditiously. There were two additional monetary changes at the top of page 5. The first is on the Wyoming Innovative Partnership for $15 million. You'll recall that Governor's letter requested double that amount, and the JAC reduced it. And you will also see no line item in the governor's office for public welfare emergencies. That $20 million does exist, but it is a continuing appropriation in statute, so there is no need for that in the budget bill. Briefly, the footnotes beginning on page 5, line 15, and a little bit about why we choose to footnote some actions and not others. So if you read through the budget, you will see more than a dozen requests by the governor, and most of those are not footnoted. So our informal rule within LSO is to footnote anything that is a change that the agency could not identify by reading the budget, or to make substantive clarification in the budget. And this first footnote is one of those substantive clarifications. You have provided an intent that $48,000 be ongoing. There was some question in the governor's budget whether it was one time or ongoing. So this is merely a clarification that $48,000, it's your intention that it is ongoing. The governor, this is not binding. It is just a statement of intention. If the state budget office, the governor's office, does not include this, what will happen is staff will just bring it to your attention in 2 years that you had a footnote that anticipated this would continue, and it is not in the budget. That's all that footnote does. I won't be as verbose in the future footnotes. Footnote number 2, this is a limitation on a request for $8,000 for the governor's appointees for the Select Committee on Blockchain and Financial Technology. The limitation JAC added is in the last line. The amount is only effective if the Select Committee remains in existence. Footnote number 3 is also a condition that the JAC added. Footnote 3 specifically says for the wild horse and burro management on the Wind River Indian Reservation, the state fund shall be matched in a ratio of $1 of state funds to not less than $1 of matching funds from the specified tribes. Footnote number 4, top of page 6, line 5, This is the Salazar Amendment specifying that the $20,000 is for in-person meetings of the State Emergency Response Commission. So why do we footnote this? If in the absence of a footnote, the governor's office budget would have increased by $20,000 and there would not be any specific direction on how those funds should be spent. Footnote number 5, I believe, is the Representative Stiff amendment for $800,000 for the Building Resilient Infrastructure Communities Federal Grant Program, BRIC. Footnote number 6 is a continuation of funding with additional specifications. This is FNRPA, $1 million general funds, and additional specifications that the funding is for litigation costs incurred by Wyoming counties involved in litigation on federal lands, water, air, mineral, and other natural resource policies. It does not include.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Don, go ahead.
This footnote does not include authorization for the use of FNRPA funds on Native American hunting litigation. That was a footnote provision in last year's budget.
Mr. Co-Chair, I made that note. I don't know that FNRPA is the right fund to go to, but we did have a fund. As you know, we had a case in Sheridan County and our county attorney was hard pressed to argue the constitutional issues. So we put money into the governor's office to fund those kind of prosecutions or those kinds of cases. And I'm not quite sure where that we should renew that note, but I'd like to see that note renewed. Those cases could easily come back.
Go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think during the conversation, during the budget hearings, we asked about the status of that case, and it was determined that the case has been dropped because the individual's in prison for quite a period of time. And we asked at that time if there was a need to, if they anticipated that coming up and with the case being dropped, it was determined that we didn't need that language in there any further.
Well, Mr. Co-Chair, the case could, if that fellow, he's in prison, but the issue could easily be raised at any moment. You know, this Supreme Court said that there's got this undefined right for hunting. If you want to leave it to the local county attorney to defend a constitutional case of that magnitude, that's fine. Otherwise, I think we ought to put a little money aside to help them out. If they get that kind of case, it could happen in any county, anywhere in the state.
So, Don, I guess the question is then, if we still have those concerns, and if something happens, if a lawsuit is filed on March 1st of the next year, then are there monies available then to immediately help with outside counsel? And in order to do that, we would have to reinsert language here or some other place. Is that fair?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that is fair. If the case involves the state, the Attorney General's office has funds anticipating litigation of all sorts in the coming years. If a case does not include the state, only includes a county in the hypothetical, then this would be a source of funds for that type of case. However, the statute is really reinserted here on line 20 in Wyoming Statute 94218A3, and really does not have, it talks about federal resources and lands, but may not cover hunting rights. So that's why the note or sentence was added last year.
And so I think the answer, Senator, is that during round robin, if you'd like to make a motion to reinsert that language, then that would be the appropriate thing to do. And you can do it a conceptual one, and the legislature, Don and company will craft it to be that language, to make it available.
No, I brought it up now because I thought you wanted us to bring these up as we went through the bill rather than waiting.
Actually, we're not going to do the amendments right now, but we're just going to go through all the technicalities.
Okay.
So just flag this, and then we'll bring that.
Gotcha.
And I've got it flagged for you too. So.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you.
At the bottom of page 6, footnote number 7 is the WIP program. Again, JAC reduced this appropriation, and also on lines 26 and 27 specified the amounts to be expended by year. The entirety of page 7 and top of page 8 is resurrected language from the original WIP program in the 2023-2024 legislation. Only thing that has been substantively changed is any dates relative to that language.
And for the committee's knowledge, so that the co-chairs and have met with the governor's office over the past 2 weeks, going through the governor's letters and the budget that we passed, trying to kind of negotiate various issues to the mutual satisfaction of what the governor wanted and finding a compromise position. And we won't go through all of those now, but this is one of them. And so we have a proposed amendment for this that will modify this, that basically makes all these funds available in the first biennium. But I just want to make you aware that we have had those negotiations. There's probably about 10 different modifications that we're going to be proposing during the round robin that. But those, we've worked with the governor to try to find a kind of a middle ground.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Co-Chairman, just for clarity on that, the amount of the appropriation is not changing.
Correct.
It's
Yeah.
just how and when the funds deploy. So just a note for the committee.
Dawn, could I ask you, if I understood correctly, it's on page 7, starting on line 4 through the rest of the page, and over on page 8 through line 3 is existing language that we brought over. Okay, thank you.
Representative Larson, that is correct. On the top of page 8 is the next agency for your consideration. It's the Secretary of State. There were 3 significant funding issues addressed here. The first is a reduction of $3.1 million for the Wyoming suite for business filings. That appears in the general fund column on line 7, administration. There was a $75,000 reduction for security awareness and education. That appears on line 8 under special revenue. And then finally, the first item for your vote for a technical point appears on page 8, line 7. You approved inserting funds to provide for the publication costs of the constitutional amendment that you approved last year. This is the property tax amendment that you approved. We have calculated the cost on that, and it appears on page 8, line 24 as of $90,000. So we would ask for a vote if you are willing to appropriate $90,000 for that purpose.
Do you want that vote now? Been moved. Is there a second? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, this is just from my point of process and clarity for all the committee members. We're either going to work the bill now or we're not. We're either going to go through and hear it all in its entirety as Mr. Richards is walking through the bill, and then we go back and work it, or we hear from Senator Kinski on his proposed amendment and we deal with it all live fire. So, I mean, it's just a matter of style about process and procedure. So everyone is clear about when they're supposed to do things and when they're not.
And that actually makes sense to me, Madam Co-Chair. So we'll come back to it as we do our walkthrough and our round robin. So just highlight it.
An explanation of the footnotes. Footnote number 1, limited direction by the committee. I think you were pretty clear that you wanted no funds to be expended for out-of-state litigation. You can see included or specified in that this is limited to litigation that does not involve the Secretary of State or participant, or the Office of the Secretary of State was not a named party, and prohibits any funds appropriated herein for those purposes. Footnote number 2, I think I've visited about, and we have that flagged for a potential technical motion in the future. The next agency, if there are no further questions, is Agency 3, the State Auditor. You added $175,210 for full funding for vacant positions. And if you're looking at your budget, we also removed $2.2 million for retiree health care to Section 304B in the bill. That $175,000 vacant position appropriation is specified in footnote 1. Section 4, or Agency 4, is the State Treasurer's Office. There were no material changes for the dollar amounts, but you did add 2 footnotes. Those appear on page 10, lines 8 through 19. The first footnote is a continuation of prior years, limiting the performance compensation. The Select Committee on Capital Financing and Investments already put the maximum amount for each of the qualified investment positions in statute. So footnote number 1 only applies to individuals who are not at the maximum. So I think there are a couple of the individuals who are not at the maximum. With the existence of footnote number 1, they could not move to the maximum. And item number 2, or footnote number 2, is a direction for the State Treasurer's Office to report annually, providing a public accounting of the direct and indirect total investment fees for all external managers in both absolute dollars and a percentage. Just for the committee's knowledge, the State Treasurer already does this. So this is already provided with or without this footnote. Section 6, the administration and information.
Go ahead.
I apologize. So if they're already required to do it and they do it, then did we require this footnote? Was this something that we talked about during the, I'm just trying to understand why we need it then.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, this was a motion of the committee. It is not required that the State Treasurer's Office does it, but they already do it voluntarily in their annual report.
Thank you. That clarifies it.
Well, and Mr. Vice Chair, you may recall part of his budget appeared to be a budget reduction of millions of dollars merely because they were paying the fees directly before the money was distributed. So that's why we wanted to have a clarification of direct or indirect. So go ahead.
The next agency for your consideration is the Department of Administration and Information. The first major change appears on line 23, the Director's Office. You might recall this agency requested all of their TRP, or Technology Replacement Program, funding in the Director's Office. And the action of the committee redistributed that $422,000 across the divisions. So I won't list out the amounts, but that 422 was taken out of the Director's Office and reappropriated in the subsequent divisions, all related to general fund.
So Don, you're saying the 4.2 million, or the?
$422,510 was requested in the Director's Office, but it really applied to computers in general services, computers at the State Library, computers in HRD, which is the Human Resource Division. So we removed the $422,000 in the Director's Office and put it in each of the agencies where those computers are actually being replaced. It's just a transparency issue. And it was a motion of the committee. This is not a staff request.
Okay.
The next numerical item appears on line 25. Again, we're at the bottom of page 10. The committee added $350 for capital operations to ensure the Capitol is to remain open to the public on Saturdays.
$350?
$350,000.
Okay, that's that good.
Speaking briefly to the 2 footnotes here, the $5 million for risk management was a revision. The request was that this amount continue in the standard budget. Footnote number 1 makes these funds one time. Footnote number 2, and this is our second of about 10 staff items. It does not necessarily require a motion, but our interpretation, I think this was a Representative Stith motion to include on Saturdays. This footnote differs from last year's or last biennium's footnote by one word. On page 11, line 21, we have inserted all Saturdays for clarification there. And that may not have complied with the maker of the motion's intent, but that was a change. So we wanted to flag it for your consideration.
Don, could you remind me why we made the 5 million a one-time fund on the risk management? Because that's a set pool, right? And that it goes up and down based upon claims and paid out claims. And so we modify it whenever the fund goes below a certain amount. Is that a fair characterization?
Mr. Chairman, no, they make an individual request each year, and sometimes you'll put in nothing. Sometimes you might put in 10 million. Sometimes it's, just
But there's a target generally, roughly, just remind us what that range is.
yes. I don't believe that the agency has a target. I believe you encourage them to do an actuarial assessment of that fund. But for about 20 years, since the mid-2000s, the JAC has had an informal target of $50 million for this fund. It was never put in statute or anything. And that fund is about half of that target. It's in the low 20s. So it is a substantial amount. I think from what I could gather of the discussion is you wanted to assess this each biennium and not just include it in their standard budget was the concept for making it one time.
Okay. thank you.
Again, if you want to remove that, we'll just flag it and you can strike that footnote. And if you strike that footnote, it'll be ongoing.
So, Mr. Co-Chair,
Please go ahead.
this is because we're at least partially self-insured for liability. Is that what this is?
Yes, Mr. Senator, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
just back on page 11, line 21, just wanted, staff did accurately reflect the maker's intention current draft. That may be subject to further amendment today, but I think staff got it exactly right.
So Senator or Representative Stith, your words sound like staccato, they're not clear. So you got to be close to your mic, and can you repeat that slowly?
Sure, sorry. Just back to page 11, line 21, I just wanted to say that staff did correctly transcribe the intention of the maker of the motion there for the opening of the to keep the Capitol open on Saturdays. That may be subject to further motion later today, but that's all, just a comment. Thank you.
And I think what Representative Stith is referring to is we have an amendment to this that, so it's not every Saturday, but you'll see that when do in round robin. So go ahead, please.
One final note on the Department of Administration and Information. I believe the State Budget Department and the agency noted a correction in the budget request, and that appears on, sorry to return to page 10, line 25. The legislature, or JAC, added $12.2 million for the MVMS, that's the Motor Vehicle Pool Replacement Fund. It was left out of their budget. It is now included in the budget bill. The next agency for your consideration is the Military Department agency.
So Don, so that's part of the governor's letter as well, correct? Or is not? And how does it correlate?
Mr. Chairman, I think there are two different issues. The 12 million that you added is from other funds. That means internal service funds, fees paid by agencies that use the motor pool. And the governor's enterprise request was for general funds in the amount of, I believe, $8 million for that purpose. So there are two separate requests independent of each other.
And if both of them are approved, then what does that mean?
If both of them are approved, the division would have $20.2 million for vehicle replacements over the next coming biennium. You'll recall potentially that when you looked at those revenue amounts, this fund had declined fairly precipitously. I don't have the exact numbers, but it was in the low teens in prior years. And I believe the most recent cash balance was in the $4 to $5 million range. So as I understood it, the $8 million was to respond to a decline in that depreciation and replacement account. And then the 12 million is for ongoing purposes where they charge agencies for the wear and tear on their vehicles. And as those are used, the fund to replace them are built up on a
So
per mile charge.
Just to summarize, the purpose of our motion in the 12.2 million was to essentially direct the agency, you need to increase your fees to cover these costs.
Or at least provide an avenue to fully fund their current fees.
Right, yeah. Go ahead.
So Dawn, that's, that addition is reflected in that 28.4 million internal funds.
Representative Larson, that's correct.
Okay, prior to adding that 12, it had been around 14. Probably what we've seen in their agency budget request is around 14. With our motion brings it up to the 28.
Representative Larson, exactly correct.
Thank you.
The next agency, if there are no further questions on agency 7, the nice thing, no change to the numbers in the table. You did continue, these are not new footnotes, continued 2 footnotes, 1 and 2. The footnote number 1 provides for federal authorization for up to 9 employees if federal funds are available for the Air National Guard. Footnote number 2 provides for up to 13 FTE for the Army National Guard to the extent federal funds are available. The next agency for your consideration is agency 8, page 13, line 11, the Office of the Public Defender. You reduced this administration line by $525,000 in general funds, $25,000 in SR or special revenue, and this related to capital case funding. However, related to this, you did continue the 303 carryover, meaning funds previously appropriated and not expended for capital cases continue on into the next biennium. You also continued, not a new footnote, continued footnote number 1, which my shorthand terminology is mini flex, meaning the agency has the ability to move funds between the 900 series for contract attorneys or the 100 series, depending upon the caseloads, the ability to hire permanent staff, and the availability of contract attorneys. This is not a new footnote. If there are no questions, the next agency is.
So Don, my question is, can you run through those numbers again? Because they're not explicit in the section.
The numbers for the capital case reduction?
Correct.
Yes. The JAC reduced it by $450,000, 425 of which is general fund, 25 of which is special revenue, which comes in the form of fees.
So the request was for $1 million and we reduced it down to 450?
My apologies, I did misstate that. It's 425 general fund, 75 other funds, total of 500,000.
So what was their original request? Was it $1 million?
That's the entirety of their request.
Okay.
You eliminated the
And what's the balance of their account?
you're able to carry over, and that appears in section 303B. And I believe 303C and D, there is $1,062,500 of general fund. So with the additional 450, they would have had almost 1.5 million. And then they have $187,500 of other funds. All of their funding comes 85% from the state, 15% from the counties.
Thank you. Go ahead, Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question on that. What sort of flexibility is available there for the agency to have access to funds? Like, for example, we put, I recall, 10 million into a fund for litigation support purposes.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, unlike the county discussion on FNRPA, I don't believe that the public defender would have access to any funds within the Attorney General's office. They would be eligible if they desired to have flex authority across the executive branch. So they could appeal to the governor's office and request funds from another agency. Let's say there was leftover funds in the Department of Corrections or Department of Revenue. They could seek those additional funds from the governor's flex authority, and that would be up to the executive branch to approve or deny that. If there's no further questions I'll move to the Department of Agriculture. The first numerical change appears on page 14, line 9. The committee added $300,000 for ag in the classroom. And then on page 14, line 14, the committee added $2,594,438 in general funds for predator management and $1 million, again on line 14, SR, and in this case, the SR special revenue is the Game and Fish Fund. And then finally, the next item, and we will probably ask for this in block motion. So this is the third staff motion, would appear on page 14, line 15. And this type of a motion occurs 3 times in this budget. In the preparation of the budget, we identified that the governor's budget request included funds that don't exist. They had included them as the agency trust fund, when in fact they were the agency account within the special revenue fund. I know this is getting into technical points, but on page 14, line 15, you will see the designation SR, and that's the appropriate designation. We took the liberty of correcting all of these. If we would have just used the Gov's Rec, it would have said AG for agency fund within their trust account. That is no longer used. So we've just updated those in 3 different agencies, but at in-block motion, just approving what we did. It's entirely a correction. It's no new money. With that, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'll briefly touch on the footnotes to this agency. Footnote number 1 sets a one-time funds of $14,800 for calibration of weights and measures. On page 15, footnote number 2 is ag in the classroom for $300,000. And this is also one time, consistent with the prior footnote. Footnote number 3 on page 15, line 11. This provides for a continuation of a footnote that last biennium was skipped, but the prior biennium had it, which specifies that up to $150,000 of these predator management funds can be expended in accordance with Chapter 2. Well, what Chapter 2 is for gray wolf depredation of livestock. On page 15, footnote 4, line 21, this is a matching funds of $1 million from the Game and Fish, and it's appropriated for special projects prioritized for preventing listing of species as endangered and projects directly involving predator control that will have the greatest benefit on wildlife. That concludes the Department of Agriculture. If there are any questions.
Any questions? All right, please proceed, Don.
The next agency is the Department of Revenue on page 16, line 9. There is no change for the dollars, with the exception of we moved Governor's Letter number 1 for $20 million in line 13. That's the valuation division. This is the property tax relief program. The governor had asked for it in a letter that appears on page 16, line 13, as an additional $20 million embedded in that general fund appropriation.
And so can you show which number is it embedded in?
The 27 million. In the absence of the 20, it would be 7,934,000. And you have moved or approved $20 million for the property tax relief program. There are also a couple of corrective notes. First of which is it's not really evident other than on line 20, the committee correctly or corrected the department's submission and included 1 FTE that they were missing from their budget, and that appears on line 20. Footnote number 1 on line 24 provides that $80,216 is one time for the Department of Revenue standard budget. And then footnote 2 at the top of page 17.
Don, what was that reference?
There's a credit card processing that is one time. And do you have the other? Yeah, credit card processing.
Thank you.
Both. Yes. Two different divisions. That's why it's split 1 and 2.
Yes.
That concludes Department of Revenue. I'll move to the Department of the Miners Hospital Board. It may be my favorite agency. There's no change in footnotes or dollars. So if there are no questions on that, Agency 15, Attorney General's Office, there are a number of issues here. So I'll take these in order. On line 19, that's the Law Office. I don't recall the maker of this motion, but you added footnote number 1 and $43,000 to provide for state bar fees in the AG's office, correct? The second item would be a subject of our umbrella motion that appears on page 17, line 20. There's a correction. This agency submitted $45,229 AG. Again, we're changing all AGs to SR, Agency Fund to Special Revenue. That appears on page 17, line 20. Next.
So Don, during the presentation of the budget, I don't know if we really even have to mention it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to, it'll just confuse folks.
Great point. And in our notes, it is not included. So
Okay.
in the summary sheet or status report that goes to the floors, we don't mention those things. And quite frankly, I'll say there's one more. It appears in the Oil and Gas Commission, and I won't mention it beyond this point.
Okay.
On line 22, you added $166,000 and 1 FTE for the CGIS program, Criminal Justice Information System. And footnote number 2 makes that effective immediate for the Cohesity Maintenance Agreement. On line 26, you reduced the appropriation by $440,000 for the request related to Safe to Tell program. $440,000. In addition, Governor's Letter 11, you added $1,600,000 or $601,058 and 1 FTE, including footnote number 3. All of this appears on line 26 for the Domestic Violence Sexual Assault program.
Don, can you remind me why we reduced the Safe to Tell? Was there a counter funds or?
I think
They didn't need that much funds. I'm trying to remember the moment.
this was a governor's office addition, and it involved both the Department of Health and the Department of the Attorney General's office. And quite frankly, I think you will see that 440 in the Gov's rec column. It was not an agency ask. So I thought that the issue received some confusion because the agency presented and was unaware of that addition to their budget, so was perhaps not in the best position to defend it. So this was a governor's ask for that agency.
So essentially, we just denied the Gov's rec and went back to the agency request. Erica?
Mr. Chairman, Erica Legursky, Governor's Policy Advisor. That was within the discussions that we had during the agency's hearing. They had asked for, I believe it was 20,000 was their original request for the Safe to Tell. It had come to light in those discussions that with the decrease in the funding that they'd been getting from the WOS grant, the Wyoming Office of Homeland Security grant that helped fund those, that over the years has continued to decrease. So the governor asked them what they needed to fully fund that contract, and that was where we came up with the additional 44,000.
So Erica, can you follow up on that? The 440,000 brings it back up to a certain amount of funding at a certain point in time with inflationary components, I presume.
Correct, with that new contract that they were doing for the Safe to Tell program.
And so what's the total cost of the contract and how much is being paid? How much money have they lost based upon the reduced funding from Homeland Security Fund.
Mr. Chairman, can I get back to you on that?
Yes, please.
And one more item before leaving the table for the Attorney General's office. And I think we have, maybe not quite half, but almost half of the staff corrections on, we're only on page 17. We need to move $400,000 from line 22 to line 26. We just put it on the wrong agency line. And when we send this out to you, we have a few additional days to do our revisions as well.
So that changes the
570, yes.
To 6 million.
Other direction, I believe. So it would be $29.3 million on line 22 rather than 29.7 million. And then on line 26, it will be 8.9 million rather than 8.5 million. The 400,000 just got put in the wrong division. Walking briefly through the footnotes, footnote number 1 on page 18, line 8, provides for the $43,000 for the bar dues. Footnote number 2 on line 14 makes the $50,000 for the cohesity maintenance effective immediately. And finally, on line 17, footnote 3, this relates to Governor's Letter number 11 for the $400,000 for the grants for child advocacy centers. Remarkably, we got the footnote on the right line, and we didn't get the money in the right line. The next agency, if there are no questions, is the Department of Environmental Quality. The first numerical change is you reduced line 25 in general funds by $985,642. This was related to a technical correction brought to you by the agency regarding their IT replacement forecast.
What's the number again?
985,000. The next item you approved was in the air quality division. You added 1 FTE and $292,776 for air quality compliance. You also added 1 FTE in water quality, making $41,742 effective immediate. And then of another position in water quality, you also made a portion of that position which monitors class 6 wells effective immediate as well. And you will see the combined effort of those 2 positions being effective immediate in footnote number 1 on page 19. And finally, on page 19, line 3, associated with footnote number 2 and Governor's Letter number 12, the committee approved Governor's Letter number 12 in the amount of $10 million for the municipal solid waste cease and transfer account. Footnote number 1 on line 14, again, makes those 2 positions in water quality effective immediate, and that is the amount of funding needed for 3 months. And
The 80,000 is 3 months, right?
3 months, that includes salary, benefits, as well as operational expenses. So their travel budget, communications budget for 2 employees.
Could you give us the number again of what the annual or biennial number is for those positions?
Yes, the biennial amount is for the first position is $351,492. And would you read the second position?
The biennial amount for the second position is $333,933.
So 351 and 333. Go ahead.
So it's a little confused. So we talked about 3 new FTEs. The one in air quality has no footnote attached to it, just replaces. But then the 2 in water quality have a portion of it effective immediately, each around 40,000 comes to the 80,000. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Thank you.
And one more clarification before we move to those, the footnotes. This agency netted an increase of 11 FTE. 9 of those FTE were Gov's Rec, which you approved. 2 of those FTE were JAC additions. one in air quality, one in water quality.
Mr. Chairman, they were budget requests. Governor denied, we went ahead and approved.
Correct.
The two.
The two, yes. Again, footnote number one, I think I've covered with Representative Larson's commentary about the $80,000, roughly 40,000 apiece for those two positions.
So Don, let's go back to that, because as whoever's presenting this budget on the floor, where do you go to the numbers to show the 11 new positions, and how much, what's the total cost just of those 11 positions?
So the total cost is a roughly, and I'm rounding generously, $3.5 million for FTE costs. What you don't have yet is the status report or the summary sheet. And we have 30 some notes
And that'll
that
be-
detail.
That'll be in that breakdown.
Correct. Why we can't give that to you now is because you might have motions today that would change all of this. So it's easier just, right.
And you don't work on Sundays till midnight. Sometimes. All right, go ahead.
Footnote number 2, we did want to bring to your attention, the governor's letter number 12 did not specify which municipal solid waste cease and transfer account the $10 million should be deposited into. We did have some communication with the Department of Environmental Quality, and this is $10 million is being deposited into the grant account. The same statute provides for a loan account, but we put it in the grant account, and I just wanted to make sure everyone was clear on that.
What's the difference?
Well, these can be used for grants, and the other account can only be used for loans.
And I thought the testimony was this should kind of clean up most of the remaining projects. Was that accurate?
That was my understanding.
Okay, go ahead.
The next agency is the Department of Audit. There are no changes to the table. There is one footnote appears on page 20. This is to make $10,000 one time. And the reason for this being one time is these are dues for the National Association of State Auditors and Controllers, and they provide a 3-year review. So you don't need one quite every biennium. So it's one time. So they come forward in the bienniums they need it. Section 23, PSC, Public Service Commission. Again, there is no change to the dollars. You did approve one additional FTE by the governor, and that relates to your footnote number 1. This is unusual, so you will probably be getting some questions about this footnote. Many people who have read this have asked us, what does this mean? And the footnote basically means if you approve all of the positions, then they can have $53,800 for construction of their lease space. Because you've already approved the 40 positions, it really is bordering on meaningless for that footnote because the condition has already been met. So there's really no need for the footnote, but it does no harm if you retain it.
So does it make more sense just to remove it?
It's a question for us.
Well, yeah.
Yes, is the answer.
The next agency, Agency 24, appears on page 21, State Parks and Cultural Resources. Most of these revisions to this agency appear on line 8 in the general fund line, $9.9 million. First of all, the committee added $63,000 and footnote number 1 for the Annals of Wyoming. You also added $120,000 and footnote number 2 for We the People. You added $350,000 for matching funds for humanities and footnote number 3. And finally, you added $10,000 and for the Centennial Farm and Ranch Program and associated footnote number 4. I won't go through all of the footnotes because they are identical to what
John, those have been footnotes we've used previously. It's just dollar differences.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I will go through the differences only on those footnotes.
Yeah.
$63,000, no change for the Annals of Wyoming. The We the People has two changes. It was increased from 100,000 to 120,000. And this was direction to be included in their standard budget. After I think 18 years of being in a footnote one time, this would be incorporated into the agency's standard budget. Footnote number 3, no change on the dollar amount, but there were two additional changes. One, the matching requirement was doubled. Historically, it had been a 1-to-1 match requirement. You increased the match requirement 2-to-1. And finally, you also allowed this to go into the standard budget. Footnote number 4 on the Centennial Farm and Ranch program, no change to the dollars or the language. You continued footnote number 5, which was a allowance. This is a mini flex for the state archaeologists to use either full-time employees or contract employees. This is a continuation footnote. This is not new. Footnote number 6 on page 23 provides one-time funding in the amount of $170,000. And this relates to the State Imaging Center. And then finally, footnote number 7, and this also is included as an addition to the table on line 11 of page 21. The committee added $5 million general fund and up to 2 at-will employee contract positions for the High Plains Research Station and Arboretum. If there are no questions, I'll move to Agency 27, the State Construction Department. The major change here is you moved $163 million of the agency request into the K-12 capital construction portion of Section 300. So 313 is where that appears. Other than that, the numbers stay the same. No footnotes. Similarly, on the top of page 24, the Wyoming Water Development Office, there is no
number, Don?
163 million. On the top of page 24, there were no changes or footnotes to the Wyoming Water Development Office. Agency 37, you have one footnote and one fairly significant change. Specifically, the committee moved $16.9 million requested from the general fund to Water Development Account 1, which for the nomenclature in the bill is designated as S1. And you will see that on line 15, 18, and 21. However, in section 300J, you make a deposit in exactly the same amount, $16,911,633. So the agency ended up exactly in the same place that they would have had they paid for those 3 divisions out of general fund. It's just the manner in which they are budgeted. And footnote number 1 on the top of page 25 makes the maintenance agreements ongoing for $432,000.
And Mr.
Go ahead.
Mr. Co-Chairman, just a question as to why we made those amendments, if someone could refresh my recollection about how we changed the manner in which they are funded. Just be helpful for me to hear.
Representative Walter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was based on the discussion of us funding the Board of Control. It's been in the general fund some years, it's been in Water One some years, over the last 30 years, probably half and half. And so this allows it to stay in the current funding format, but it also allows more money to be in the Water One account for Water One projects to be completed within the state of Wyoming. And so that was the reason for taking this approach.
Go ahead.
The argument that we heard, Madam Chair, as you'll recall last year, was particularly from the advocates of Water One, is when they had Board of Control in there, there's less money in there for the Water One projects. And so we're trying to address that and keep Board of Control in there. And so we're saying, okay, we'll take whatever that funding is to handle Board of Control and put that in Water One for more water projects, trying to put enough salve on both sides.
And so Don, I think it would be helpful to kind of walk through how this is funded. So it's kind of like under the cap and over the cap dollars. Because I think that helps explain what our rationale was.
So the water account 1 is funded with severance taxes, all of which come in under the $155,000 cap. $155 million cap. That account, in addition to severance taxes, receives interest income off of its balance, which can be sizable. And secondly, it receives loan repayments for projects that it has loaned out to municipalities or irrigation districts, and those payments are made back to that fund. So those are the three sources of revenue.
And so by taking it, on the last time when we did this several years ago, we put it back into the Water One account to help fund it, particularly when we had minimum revenues or deficits. And so, so the question then is, the political issue is, do we fund Water One account with under the cap dollars at a guaranteed amount, so they don't have to ever ask for it for those water projects? Or after you take the existing under the cap dollars that they have, which is how much does that annually that goes into water? Yeah, roughly 20 million.
Yes, 19.3.
And so after that 40 million biennially number is accumulated for any other further water projects in Water One, should it be under the cap dollars, so they don't have to come ask for it? Or for water projects, should they have to go to the general fund or some other source, just like any other project that we develop or that the legislature appropriates for? And so that's the political issue, on whether or not we leave the maximum amount of dollars in Water One through severance tax, or do we use the general fund that we just added to it to make up for it when we have the dollars to make up for it? So that's the difference. Thank you.
Moving on to the Agency 39, that's the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust Fund. You approved a portion of Governor's Letter number 7. Specifically, he requested $20 million general fund to address the spread of invasive plants and grasses. You approved $5 million of that and included footnote number 1 on the bottom of page 25. You also included language that the distribution or expenditures of this appropriation are conditioned on a 1-to-3 match. Footnote number 2 at the top of page 26 provides for the deposit of $2 million of income from the income fund, Wildlife Natural Resource Trust Fund income fund, into the corpus. Agency 41 on line 10, page 26 is the fire prevention electrical safety. You did make 2 changes here, but both of these were technical improvements to the agency request. They had requested a change of about $132 million on lines 13 and 14 combined for purposes of employer-paid healthcare when they reclass the employees. Well, just because employee salaries go up doesn't mean their associated health insurance goes up. So you caught that technical point in the request and pulled that out.
Excuse me. So Don, this is one that, once again, it won't be on the summary sheet.
This one will be, and the reason being is when you look at the governor's rec, it'll look like you cut $140 million or $140,000 out of this agency. You did, but it was just a correction. And we will note that. The next agency, Agency 42, is the WSGS, or Wyoming State Geologic Survey. You added $2 million on line 28, page 26 for aerial surveys, and included footnote number 1 in the middle of page 27, which provides for the airborne surveys. This is a little bit different. This matching requirement is not binding, unlike all of the matching requirements to date for the humanities or invasive plants and species. This is to the greatest extent possible. So it's an encouragement, not a requirement. The next
reason for that was what?
I think the agency represented that they are likely to receive federal funds. But they are competitive and could not guarantee it. And I think you said encourage them to the greatest extent possible. The next agency is Agency 44, another favorite because there's no change in dollars and there are no footnotes. The next agency is Agency 45. There is a total of $35,900. And I think this was Representative Swaniter's catch on the TRP program. That's the Technology Replacement Program, and recognition that the agency had used the incorrect amount or schedule for purchase of laptop and standing computers. So 35,900 was reduced, and that appears in 4 lines. Line 3, line 4, line 6, and line 10. The committee also added footnote number 1, which is merely a continuation footnote. This has been in prior budget, which allows for the movement of funds up to $523,000 between the 100 and 900 series. For a short version, this is to fund the capital security operations contractors if necessary. Page 29, the Department of Health.
Don, let's take it's about 10 o'clock. Why don't we take a quick 10-minute break? Let everyone stretch their legs and we'll be rushing back shortly.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Don.
The next agency, members of the committee, for your consideration is Agency 48. It's the Department of Health. There were multiple changes to this. It appears on page 29. So moving to line 8, that's healthcare financing. JAC added 1.9 million general fund, 1.9 million federal funds for postpartum care. You added $9.3 million for Medicare Part D in general funds,
How much is that, Don?
$9.3 million general funds. The governor had requested those from reversions, and you made an outright appropriation. You also approved
Back on the Part D for the dual enrolled, correct?
that is correct. You also added $967,000 general fund, $967,000 federal funds for the comprehensive waiver on line 8. Moving to line 11 in the general fund column, you added $387,000 for public health nurse salaries and footnote number 5. Moving to line 15, you reduced the general fund appropriation by $12.2 million and increased the S5, that's the school foundation program, on line 16 by the identical amount, $12.3 million. This relates to the developmental disability program for preschool children. You also saved $670,000 as a result of the preschool developmental program child count. And finally, on line 20, you added $200,000 for grants to Wyoming senior centers in the Division of Aging. There was a corrective motion to add 1 FTE and reduce a part-time FTE. Now, on pages 30 through 31, a brief discussion of the footnotes to the Department of Health. Footnote number 1 on the top of page 30 makes the TRP, or the Technology Replacement Program, funding one time. This was a corrective action from their budget submission. Footnote number 2 is a continuation. In fact, this is required by statute in accordance with Title 42. The Joint Appropriations Committee must set the monthly income payment for SSI, or the state's Supplemental Security Income Program, and you have done so in footnote 2. In footnote number 3, this is $25,000 for integration. Integrating the benefit management system one time. So this is an IT request, and again, differs from the budget submission. Footnote number 4 is the postpartum funding. Now, this one might be asked, well, why did you break this out? This should have been in the budget. Well, you might recall the agency left it out of the budget, so we can't go back and look at the budget documents for that $1.9 million breakout. So it is appears in footnote number 4. Footnote number 5 at the top of page 31. This is the public health nurse compensation. There were 3 counties, I believe, that did not participate in the state employee compensation increase because they are county employees. Footnote number 6 makes the tobacco trust funds effective immediate. If this was not done pursuant to the governor's request, these funds would roll over into the corpus, and there would be insufficient tobacco trust funds to fund these substance abuse programs in the biennium. Footnotes 7 and 10 are quite related, but they are separated by division and purpose. Footnote number 7 provides for a biennialization. You will see that it is doubling the appropriation of $227,000 for a program manager in the 988 program. I'm going to go out of order here and jump to footnote number 10 because this also biennializes the 988 program, but for operations. And these are in different units. So that's the reason why you have two different footnotes. Footnote number 8.
So the total amount appropriated biannually?
The total amount is about $1.2 million, and it would double to $2.4 million in the 27-28 biennium.
Mr. Chairman, Don, it seems to me that when we funded that, we funded it. We had funds available to fund it for half a biennium. And this makes that correction to be ongoing biennialized.
That's correct. The next footnote number 8, makes the maintenance repair one time in the amount of $375,000. Footnote number 9 also makes the electronic medical record upgrade one time for $350,000. Moving to the top of page 32, we've discussed footnote 10. Footnote 11 is very similar to footnote number 6, making $7.5 million from the Tobacco Trust Fund effective immediate for the same reasons. If this were not effective immediate, it would roll over into the corpus. Footnote number 12, this is the swap of general funds to school foundation program funds for the preschool DD program. And it also limits this appropriation if Senate File 19 is enacted into law. Senate File 19 is the JEC, Joint Education Committee's proposal to increase developmental disability preschools by a significantly larger amount than JAC did. Footnote number 13.
So I wonder if if that should say if the appropriation in Senate File 19 is adopted, because you could have that bill be adopted without any appropriation. And if it's adopted without an appropriation, it would still then nullify for this language, correct?
Representative Larson, no, because it's reduced dollar for dollar for any appropriation that is
Okay.
in that. So we've kind of
Perfect.
covered all
Thank you.
circumstances.
Okay. Thank you.
Footnote number 13 on the bottom of page 32 makes $746,000 for equipment repairs and maintenance one time. And then finally, footnote number 14, it looks weird because it's $10.68 million, but this is really the only way we could figure out to ensure that the $200,000 increase that this committee provided for senior center grants is distributed in the same manner as the underlying $10.4 million. So it looks like you've added 10.6. You have not. You've only added the 200,000 to bring it to a total of 10.68 million.
So that'll be in the summary sheet.
Yes.
Okay. Easy.
On page 33 is the next agency, unless there are questions on Department of Health. The Department of Family Services. This is a request for a staff correction. It is already embedded in the bill. On line 5, the amount for the school foundation program for educational services in the amount of $3,609,575. Unfortunately, we had provided an inaccurate number of $4.3 million that was related to educational expenditures. So we've need to correct that by about 600 million and change. And in fact, the number in here already reflects the correction.
So how,
Keep in mind what you were doing here is you were paying for educational services at the boys' school and the girls' school with school foundation money rather than general fund money. And we gave you the wrong number. And then in round robin, we gave you the wrong number. And so we just corrected it and said, yes.
and so Don, the total number difference.
$3,609,575. It appears on page 33, line 5.
So the difference is about 600.
Correct.
That's my question. So we're actually, it's a $600,000 change.
Correct.
But this 3 point, and Mr. Chairman, just to correct, This is a change from previous budgets because that 3.6 million that we have here typically had been paid with general funds for educational purposes. We're now covering those educational purposes out of the school foundation.
That is correct. And apologies, the specific amount for the correction is $636,984. Next, on line 8, there were 5 different changes. You added $60,000 and footnote number 3 for indigent burial. The committee added $100,000 and footnote number 4 for juvenile justice reporting. You added $200,000 and footnote number 6 for office furniture at the office space in the Wyoming Life Resource Center campus facility. And you added 1.3 million, or you reduced $1.3 million for eKids and added footnote number 5 to transition the eKids program to Agency 57 Wyoming Community College Commission. Finally, in the table on line 8, you reduced $16,389 for a technical correction on special revenue for a reclass position. Walking through the footnotes, footnote number 1 is to move the funding, and these are the right numbers, to the boys' school and the girls' school on the school foundation program rather than general funds, and directed the agency to include that in their standard budget for the next fiscal biennium. Footnote number 2 is a continuation. This limits the total number of group homes in the state. This has been a footnote for over 2 decades for the Department of Family Services. Footnote number 3 is the indigent burial and $60,000. Footnote number 4 is the juvenile justice reporting. This footnote makes the $100,000 one time. Excuse me, this makes it ongoing, not one time, ongoing. Footnote number 5, this is the transfer of all licenses, data, and functions.
The effect of that, Donald, is that they'll put that in their general budget.
That's correct. Footnote number 5 relates to the transition of eKids. Footnote number 6 is the $200,000 for the WLRC office furnishing. If there are no questions on Agency 49, I'll move to Agency 51, the Livestock Board. The committee added on line 7, $137,153 for a deposit into the law enforcement account funding number 1. This would bring it up to $500,000 at the beginning of the fiscal year. And that is also the subject of footnote number 1 on page 35, line 20. And it directs the agency to bring that account up to $500,000 in future budgets. Agency 53 has no changes in the table and no footnotes.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
going back to page 35, Agency 51, the Livestock Board. My understanding was we would just have them revert all funds in that account at the end of each biennium, and they would request a new 500,000 each year. And that way there isn't a confusion of how much do they need to get to the 500. Is that still the indicated desire?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walter, that is, and the automatic reversion is already in statute. And then the footnote directs the agencies to include that 500,000 in future standard budgets. Jumping to page 36, we're now on Agency 55, the Oil and Gas Commission. You added footnote number 1 to direct the agency to do a review of their facility and come up with a major maintenance proposal. You'll recall this facility is owned by the commission and is not benefiting from state major maintenance. The footnote would direct the agency to review the state processes for UW, colleges, and any public facilities, and develop a plan for funding their own major maintenance or creating a major maintenance reserve for the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission owned facilities.
So Don, we brought this up because it was we kind of discovered it. But the JAC didn't request this information earlier.
I think that's a fair point or a fair assessment. I think it comes up when the agency asks for funding within their operating budget for major maintenance activities. So they had asked to replace their roof, which is not something you typically see in a budget request. And I think more recently they asked for some minor modifications to their facility. And I think that initiated the conversation by, why don't you handle this like every other agency in your major maintenance operations? And they responded, we don't have major maintenance. And then the conversation about maybe you should ensued.
You do have a building. Yeah. Okay. All right, go ahead.
Agency 57, the Wyoming Community College Commission. This is footnote number 1 on page 37, line 11, is the second half of the eKids program, which is a movement or an increase of $1.3 million on line 11 for the eKids program. And then on line 12, the committee added $200,000 for rodeo, and that also appears on footnote number 3. And you increased the state aid and directed the agency to follow the state formula for distribution by the amount of $12,037,516. That was a JAC add. On the WIN program on line 14, the committee added $204,000 for student loans and $219,000 for 2 faculty position with an ARPA backstop. So this same $219,000 will first come from the ARPA bill, which is already appropriated in that bill. And to the extent there are insufficient funds in the ARPA bill, then you also have a backstop of general funds on line 14. We did move the Wyoming Kickstart program in the amount of $2.5 million. This is the Wyoming's Tomorrow Kickstart program. It appears in section 327. And you will recall that the governor denied over $912,000 of agency requests, primarily related to software, information technology, and the SLEDS program. And the committee allowed the commission to carry over $912,000 for those specified purposes, and that appears in section 303F of the bill. Footnote number 1 is the second half of the eKids program. Footnote number 2 is direction to use the distribution formula. In the absence of footnote number 2, the language of the recommendation arguably would control, and the funds would be distributed only to those districts experiencing substantial inflation. Footnote number 3 is your addition of $200,000 for rodeo programs. Footnote number 4 is the student loan portion of WIN. Footnote number 5 is the faculty portion of WIN, with the commentary that it is a backstop to any other source, the other source being ARPA funds. If there are no questions on the Community College Commission, the next agency is the State Lands and Investments. The major change here appears on line 9. You will see in the governor's letter number 4, he requested $24.56 million for the Clean Water SRF. And this has been moved to section 325 within section 318 at the back of the bill. So that clean water addition related to governor's letter number 4 is in a section 300. You also reduced.
So the way you said that is section 325 in section 318. So what you're referencing is section 325 from our current budget bill, where the money's currently lodged. And then we make that change in this budget's 318.
Correct. And so when we get to section 318, I'll go through that very slowly, but section 318 is the repository for all prior revisions to prior budgets. So it's an odd section, but we have to bring in old budgets and amend them. And in this case, 4 different budgets are being brought in and amended in the text of this budget. It's an odd situation because the budget bill is only good for 2 years. And we don't codify anything that's in the budget bill, meaning you don't find those provisions in the green books. So we can't reference something in the green books. We have to actually bring in the original language, pursuant to the constitutional requirement that no provision can be amended without full disclosure of the contents. You can't amend by amendment. Finally, on page 39, line 18, I would describe this as you right-sized the mineral royalty grant program. The governor had asked for about $51 million, and you reduced that by 28 million, specifically related to the coal lease bonus payments that are not anticipated. On page 40, you have one footnote, and this is to allow for a contract position within the forestry division only when there are available federal funds to reimburse. Agency 63, the governor's residence, you added $30,000 general fund and footnote number 1 for supplies, events, food, operations of the residence. Agency 66, the Wyoming Tourism Board, you increased this amount by $2.7 million. First of all, $700,000 for a Wyoming float in the Rose Parade and footnote number 1, and $2 million for the Sequicentennial 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence as specified in footnote number 2. You will also see the first or a early use of Fund S14 on page 41, line 16. That's the new designation for the Wyoming Tourism Operations account or income account. Page 42 is the Department or the University of Wyoming. On line 6 for state aid, you have increased that amount by $585,000 for WWAMI, $2 million or $200,000, excuse me, and footnote number 5 for rodeo, $1 million and footnote number 3 for libraries, $3 million and footnote number 1 for graduate stipends. And you reduced this amount or the request of the agency by $2.5 million. And this relates to artificial intelligence and is the subject of footnote number 2. While you reduced $2.5 million, you also required a like amount of matching funds. So the total remains the same for artificial intelligence. Moving on to line 8, still on page 42, you added $2 million for the nuclear capacity efforts within SER or the School of Energy Resources, along with footnote number 8. You also added $750,000 for innovation incentive awards. I think this was the Senator Anderson amendment and colloquially referred to as the X Prize. On line 8, you also added $10 million SIPA funds at the request of SER for the Coal Road and footnote number 6. On line 11, the endowments and matching funds, you adopted the full request and increased the Gov's rec by $12.5 million related to footnote number 11, Porous Media, flow through Porous Media. And you also added $7 million matching funds, excuse me, $2 million matching funds, bringing the total to $12 million. And this relates to footnote number 10. Walking quickly through the footnotes, footnote number 1 relates to graduate stipends in the amount of $3 million. Footnote number 2 is the $2.5 million general fund, $2.5 million other funds related to.
On number 1, the graduate stipend, is that the same number as in the prior budgets or is it new?
This is a new exception request, all new funding. But
So
no,
that was increasing how much we paid for them. Is that right?
correct. And you don't have a prior payment because it's a block grant, but they certainly provided graduate stipends historically, but it was never broken out. And so this is a new request for $3 million.
So is it a one-time or is it, do we presume that this 3 million will become a biennial budget in their block grant?
This is governed by the governor's rec, and I believe this is all ongoing. So it would continue in their state aid. It would not be broken out. Footnote number 2 is the AI footnote, 2.5 million, general fund, 2.5 million matching funds. Footnote number 3, top of page 43 is $1 million for library collections. For the chairman's benefit, this is same approach, would be included in their standard budget going forward. Footnote number 4 is a carryover. This has been used in prior budgets. This is not new, $10 million for athletic matching funds. Moving over to page 44, footnote number 5 is the 200,000 for rodeo. Footnote number 6 is a total of 17 million. S13 is the nomenclature for the SIPA fund for the coal solvent extraction or coal-derived asphalt roads. Footnote number 7 is matching funds as requested by the agency, approved by JAC in the amount of 2 million from the SIPA account for SER purposes to be matched 1-to-1. Footnote number 8 relates to nuclear energy capacity at the University of Wyoming. This was a request of the university, denied by the governor, and added back by Joint Appropriations Committee. Footnote number 9 is the X prize for $750,000 within SER. Footnote number 10 is a total of $12 million. And let me correct my prior comments. The governor requested 5 million. You added 7, which brings the total to 12. Footnote number 11 is the full funding, 12.5 million on top of the governor's rec of 12.5 million for the Center for Flow Through Porous Media, bringing the total to $25 million. The balance of that footnote is a carryover because you provided the same level of funding in the 23-24 biennium. So no new language in Romanets I through IV. If there are no questions on UW, I'll move to the WICHE program. You added 1 footnote, no new dollars beyond the governor's request. And you directed that $715,000 is for student contracts for scholarships allocated by giving priority to students pursuing higher ed in disciplines with repayment. What this means is everything else first before vets. Vets are last because they're the only occupation that doesn't have a repayment requirement. At the bottom of page 47 is the enhanced oil recovery. No changes to dollars, no footnotes. Agency 72, retirement system. You approved the governor's rec. So just for your background, JAC did not add additional FTE, but you have added a total of 5 FTE pursuant to the governor's recommendation for this agency. And you added footnote number 1, which is identical to the footnote provided in the state treasurer's office, limiting performance compensation salaries. The next agency is agency 77. You approved a portion, $2 million of the requested $6.8 million for cybersecurity in governor's letter number 8, and that appears on page 49, line 2. Again, in total, the governor and the JAC added 9 total FTE to this agency.
Go ahead.
I thought that was 10. We only done 9.
You added 10 as a result of the governor's letter. However, their underlying budget asked for a reduction of 1 because they transferred it to the Department of Revenue. So net, the agency has 9 more FTE. Footnote number 1 addresses that the unified network is effective immediately.
Don, how does that, because if you look at your footnote 2, you've got 10 full-time positions and 2 million. How does that play out in terms of what an employee would be paid and if they can really get 9 or 10 out of it? And if they switched one over, I presume that those dollars went away. So it would be fair to say the 2 million then is really for 9 positions. I'm trying to make sense of the.
Mr. Chairman, Good point. First of all, in practice, can they hire 10 employees on March 15th? Probably not. I'm just guessing. It will take some time to get all 10 up to speed. This would provide a biennial amount of $100,000 per year per employee. What that translates into is maybe about a $70,000 job after you take into account benefits.
And so the FTE they gave up, the money went that as well, right? Or did it?
That is correct. The person still resides there. They just made a realization, I think it was in the liquor division in the Department of Revenue, that agency was using that full IT staff.
So if we, instead of limiting it to $2 million, if we say, give us your mean payment of your average employee, and if that comes into to be $3.2 million, I think we ought to know that. And so is there a way we can kind of have that number available?
Mr. Co-Chairman
Go ahead.
and Mr. Richards, isn't this what the agency asked for? Was that number?
Mr. Chairman, they actually asked for 37 employees
Well,
and
I-
6.8 million. But
Right, I recall the 37 employees and we questioned the 6.8 million calculus, that also didn't make sense.
Right.
But then I think, was the 2 million figure generated from us or from ETS, I guess is the question. Because we've always been challenged both with the number of employee requests and the dollar amount associated with the number. And so my hesitation in increasing it for them is it's not consistent with their own ask of what they want, and I think that they should receive a reduced amount of what they ask.
They are.
So I don't support increasing this figure to 3.1, is my point, Mr. Chairman.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Chairman, you are actually giving them more on a per FTE basis than they had requested. They'd requested an average of $183,700 per biennium, which is, 91,000, and you're technically giving them 100,000. So you're giving them a little bit more on a per FTE, but you did reduce their total ask from 6.8 to $2 million.
And so, but they'll fill what they can fill. And if they're hiring managers or other folks, then they may only fill 8 positions.
That is correct. And there's nothing that requires them to pay 100,000. They could pay some of them 50,000 and others 120,000 and mix and match.
Okay, thank you.
I think that addresses Agency 77. If there are no further questions, Agency 80, Department of Corrections, at bottom of page 49, line 24. The committee added $500,000 for recruitment and retention, along with footnote number 1. You also added $60,000 for restoration of rights. That relates to footnote number 2. And on line 27 for support services, you added $2.7 million for inflationary costs of medical services and footnote number 3. Net, this agency reduced FTE by a total of 3 FTE. So they have fewer FTE. I think I've mentioned all 3 footnotes, but again, on page 50, footnote number 1 is recruitment and retention. This was a conceptual motion, so I think the maker, Representative Sherwood, might want to look at that closely, but I think we captured your intent. Footnote number 2 provided $60,000 is for an at-will employee contract. This again related to Chapter 181 for the restoration of rights. And finally, footnote number 3 for $2.7 million is the inflationary cost for medical. Next agency is Agency 81. The JAC added $23,000 to the Board of Parole in general funds and added footnote number 1 for records processing. Agency 85 at the bottom of page 51, the Wyoming Business Council. On line 25, you added or you switched the funding for SBIR from LSRA to general fund in the amount of $12 million. So that's just a fund movement, not increase in funds from that amount requested. You also added $300,000 for the Wyoming Women's Business Center and footnote number 2. Frankly, this, I believe the testimony supports was forgotten by the agency and you restored the full funding. You also added on line 25, $429,000 for the Asia Pacific Trade Program, which was requested by the agency and previously denied by the governor. On the investment ready communities on line 26, you also switched the funding of $8 million from LSRA to general funds. And finally, on line 26 in the far right, you will see S4, that's the MRG funding. You kept that at $8 million, which was the original request, without favorable action on the governor's letter, which would have reduced that to $4 million. On page 52, the footnotes. Footnote number 1, this is the follow the process footnote, directing the agency to make their IT requests not included in their standard budget or one time. Footnote number 2, I referenced previously as the Wyoming Women's Business Center. Footnote number 3 specifies that the $2 million for the economic laboratory is one time. Footnote number 4 also makes the $429,000 for the Asia Pacific trade one time. And finally, this was a request of the committee and a motion, and we associated it with the $900,000 of federal funds that is in the budget for administrative costs to direct the agency to include future state small business credit initiative funding within the agency's budgets and B11s as appropriate. The next agency is the Wyoming Energy Authority. There are no footnotes and no changes.
Can you just, I'm trying to remember. This is something they ask for every year, every biennium.
I don't recall the maker of the motion. It might have been Representative Stiff. I'm not sure, but you might recall during their testimony, they're running a fairly sizable private equity firm that is investing in Wyoming companies with federal funds. And I think it's a total of $30 million. I could be wrong on that they're getting in tranches of funding from the federal government and then investing those funds. Those funds are not being processed through the traditional budget process. And this footnote directs them to include that.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
And I believe the total is about $56 million that they received initially through the U.S. Treasury State Small Business Credit Initiative, which is divided into 2 separate pieces.
So that'll be an ongoing revolving fund then from their investment returns?
Mr. Chairman, it's an odd program where at the end of 8 years, yes, they may get some money back, but they spend the first 8 years doling the money out. And then after that, the state may get some money back.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiff, thank you for the clarification on my number. If there's no further questions on the Wyoming Business Council, we also touched on the Wyoming Energy Authority. We're now on the Wyoming Stable Token Commission. This one is unusual, so I'll go through this a little bit slower. I'm sure most of you were expecting to see on line 21, page 53, a general fund appropriation for $5.8 million. You were expecting to see that because that was the motion. We've structured this such that the general fund deposit into the Wyoming stablecoin account is in section 300, subsection N, and then the appropriation is out of their own account. That's the general structure that they've been operating under. So it is general funds, but we deposit it into their account, and then they're spending money out of their account. You also have two footnotes at the top of page 54 for the Stable Token Commission. The first anticipates that this $5.8 million, excuse me, the first directs the agency to submit exception requests to the extent they have any. And footnote number 2 specifies that the 5.8 million is coming out of the Stable Token Administration account. Agency 96 is the State Budget Department. No changes on numbers. You did add one footnote, actually two footnotes. One for the grants management in the amount of $500,000 at the bottom of page 54.
Don, is there a bill coming out for the Stable Token?
Mr. Chairman, not to my knowledge, related to this issue. I think there might be unrelated issues, but not to their budget.
Okay, thank you.
Footnote number 2 to the State Budget Department appears at the top of page 55. And this is for that $50,000 may be matched for the state's budget management system. There are no changes in footnotes to the Office of the Guardian Ad Litem. Agency 101, the Supreme Court. You added 500,000 in 2 FTE, or another way of looking at that is you reduced their request by $1.988 million. This relates to footnote number 2. Next, you allowed the Chancery Court to carry over any leftover money. That appears in section 300G, and the amount of that carryover as of today is $947,000, although they're spending that down each month now.
So, Don, I do have a question on the Supreme Court and on their budget, particularly with regards to circuit courts and the operation of the circuit courts. Recently, I had a discussion with the folks at the Laramie County Circuit Court that in the last 10 years, in the last 10 years, they have lost 2.5 employees, meaning employees that were working at the circuit court in Laramie County became vacated, and then they were never filled, but the positions were filled in a different location doing a different job. I don't recall ever seeing that in their budget or in our budget, or understanding that that somehow they're moving positions within their court structure. And now we have a request asking for 4 new positions in that Laramie County Circuit Court. So in part, we're replacing positions that they move someplace else with, through their operations. And I found that very interesting, and because I've never heard of that before, or that they were doing that. So I'm curious if that is accurate, and if what's the authority or the guidelines for, if we allocate certain amount of positions for various circuit courts, and they move them around where they want them, how do we monitor it or control it, or know what's going on, if that's correct?
Mr. Chairman, I believe within line 21 on that circuit courts, for example, you're exactly right. They could move FTE around the state to address workload issues, and as any agency could within that division. Typically they don't report. We could ask for that information. They don't report by the individual circuit courts like they do on the district court side, because of course they're a different structure. So they report in some, but we could probably either look back in prior budgets. We may have the ability to do that ourselves rather than ask them, and see if there's any change in the authorized positions per court.
Go ahead.
So Don, they would have the ability to move them, for example, hypothetically, they could move them from Laramie County to another county circuit court. That would be within the division, but they couldn't take a circuit court FTE and move it out of that division, say into Office of Administration or something similar to that. Am I correct?
Yes, and I'll have to research this a little bit more, but I think they can do whatever they want within that line.
Right.
And I'm not saying that they have, we'll have to look and see if they have.
Go ahead, Madam Co-Chair.
My understanding that if we look at the workload study, that they make those adjustments based on current workloads. And so if at the time, the workload study indicated that those positions didn't need to be refilled, but now it does, because I think the courts operate a little differently than other state agencies where it is a supply and demand issue. So the workload study indicates where resources need to be allocated at the time.
Go ahead.
On that circuit court line, you added 4 FTE and reduced the total request by $831,000, leaving $700,000. And that is the subject of footnote number 3 for the circuit courts as well. So they ended up with 4 new FTE and $700,000. On line 23, you move.
Don, just to follow up on that. So, because they made the request, they requested 11 or I think FTEs for the circuit court, or roughly.
I believe it was 9.
It was 9. And 4 of them were for Laramie County, and then the other ones are interspersed around. Do we have the authority to say, okay, we're going to give you 4 FTEs, but 2 of them must go to Laramie County? I mean, I'm just curious if we direct that.
Mr. Chairman, the committee or the legislature has specified things via a footnote for the period of the budget. So hypothetically, you could say of these employees, 2 new employees shall only be filled if they reside or if they are located in Laramie County.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But with that language, at the end of 2 years, then the Supreme Court would have the ability to move those positions wherever they choose.
Unless we put it in the budget again.
Continuing on line 23, you moved $125,000 from the judicial retirement to branch-wide resources. You'll recall this was for the respite funding. And on line 26, you reduced the judiciary's request by $60,000 associated with enterprise inflation related to judicial letter number 1. You reduced the requested amount for conferences and education by $87,860. And at the appropriate time, our next staff motion or staff suggestion here is really a correction on behalf of the courts. On line 26, when they requested funds for compensation increases, they only included general funds. And they do have a number of staff that are funded with other funds, specifically special revenue. And the request would be to authorize that special revenue in the amount of $185,640 SR.
And you have that amendment
I do.
written up and ready to go for round robin.
Moving on to page 56, footnote number 1 is a continuation of the increased salaries that you approved last year. This is either this passes or the bill that you also have sponsored for introduction passes. On page 57, footnote number 2 provides $500,000 and 2 FTE allows the courts to determine, the Chief Justice specifically, to determine which of those employee positions they requested are filled. Similarly, on the circuit courts, the judicial branch has the authority to determine which of the 4 FTE are populated. And if the committee so desired, this would be where you would want to specify any particular county benefiting from those increased FTE. Footnote number 4 just specifies the $125,000 is for use of retired judges, commissioners, and magistrates. Footnote number 5 provides the specified amount for education conferences and related travel. And finally, footnote number 6 provides for 70%, and I'm rounding just a bit here, but 70% of the requested enterprise inflation, which is consistent with your action on the governor's request. I think we will skip pages 58 through 67, unless there are any questions. There are no changes for the judicial branch. And on page 68, section 205, the only addition here is your concurrence with the governor's recommendation and the superintendent of public instruction's recommendation for the ECA, and that appears in footnote number 1, as it has in the past several years, on the bottom of page 68 and top of page 69. Next, the Department of Education, Agency 206. The numerical changes appear on the top of page 70 under school support. The committee added $50,000 in footnote number 2 for the protein efforts at school lunches. And you also added $496,000 in footnote number 3, as well as 2 full-time positions for the deaf and hard of hearing unit. There was a technical correction of $1,374 SR on line 2, page 70, that was also adopted by the committee. I think I've touched base on most of the footnotes, 2 and 3 at least, but footnote number 1 is a continuation from prior years. This basically requires the department to continue its support of applied agriculture, think FFA programs, throughout the next biennium. On page 71, there were no changes to the Board of Equalization. On the Environmental Quality Council,
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
briefly, back to the Department of Education on footnote 3. I recall, so this $500,000 general fund appropriation for outreach to the deaf and hard of hearing unit. I recall asking a question in that agency about the trust fund that they have, which I think's purpose is related to this actual mission of outreach for the deaf and hard of hearing. And so my question is, would it be more appropriate to use funds from that trust fund rather than the general fund for this purpose? And I remember asking the department how much was in that trust fund and its history, and I think they were going to follow up maybe. I think there's a lot of money in there. It was created in, I think the 1940s from a large endowment,
And does it have a trickle
according to my
contribution?
Google research.
I know a little bit about that. I don't know the balance yet, but hopefully staff is looking that up. It actually was created with the act of admission. There are state lands set aside only for deaf and hard of hearing services, I think is the trust fund that you're referring to. It's similar to the K-12 school or the Game and Fish or Fish Hatchery Trust Fund.
I think there's a second one, Mr. Chairman, if I can, because based on my research, it is named after a person. And it looks like that person, it was an estate fund.
Thank you for the clarification. We can look up the balances of both of those. So I think it's the Montgomery Trust and the State Land School Deaf and Hard of Hearing Trust.
Just a note there.
And so, yeah, and do they use the proceeds or the income off of either one of those to help fund, or what's it used for?
I didn't
Or
know.
does it accumulate?
So the Montgomery Trust Fund it has its own unit within the Department of Education. And so the interest income for that fund is incorporated into the agency's budget.
But what's it used for?
I don't know the specifics.
Mr. Chairman, my independent research, unqualified and unverified, despite my question to the department on it, there are donative restrictions associated with it. Specifically, my understanding is those donative restrictions are for the deaf and hard of hearing. That's why I'm thinking it's an appropriate kind of unique use of that particular fund. But I could be completely mistaken by all of that. And we can allow staff to research that and we can move on, but just a placeholder there.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Kath.
the balance for the Montgomery Trust Fund principal as of November 14th is 7.8 million.
And how about the Active Mission Trust Fund?
Mr. Chairman, could you repeat that, please?
What's the name of that?
Yeah, it's like L14, the State Land Trust Fund associated with the deaf and hard of hearing.
Mr. Chairman, the L14 for the Education Trust Fund, that balance would be about 5 million. No, it's not the right.
Sorry, we'll get back to you. Just to clarify on the Montgomery Trust, that is limited to visual impairments, the blind only, not for hearing impairments.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that there is a bill that Senator Furphy is sponsoring to assist with hearing aids. And so maybe this same question rolls into, is that better funded through this account if allowed rather than general funds? Just,
Is that for legislative members or?
yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Representative Sponsor.
I'm going off base a little bit, but I need a clarification if I could. On page 70 in the Department of Education, lines 11 through 15 talk about support for the agricultural farming programs. And my question is, if we drop back to section 10, the Department of Agriculture, page 15, there's also appropriation there of 300,000. Could you tell me the difference? Are they administered in different departments?
Sure. I think the Department of Education programs are like FFA, and the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources, or excuse me, Department of Agriculture program is for more applied ag and ranch programs, not necessarily incorporated through the K-12 system.
Thank you.
And to follow up on your question, very close. It's L5 is the nomenclature, and it's $5.7 million in that state trust fund for the lands.
Do we know how the money is dispensed, or is it?
So interest income off of that 5.7 million is subject to your appropriation.
And have we been appropriating?
You know, I can remember, some limited appropriations, mostly for capital construction activities that would benefit the populations covered. But it is not consistent. So you might go 10 years and let that build up to some level and then appropriate it. It's not an annual thing.
How is it invested?
It's in the permanent land fund, so it's invested the same way as the common school account.
So if it's got roughly 6 million in it, it's generating 4% interest. It could come close to covering us. At least half of it.
Yeah. I think the next, if we're ready to move on to the next agencies, these are now into the boards and commissions, and the first one with a change appears on page 76 and the top of page 77. The Wyoming Gaming Commission, which is agency 38. The committee added $200,000 and footnote number 1 for a study in consultation with the legislature on statewide gaming. And I think we did work with the sponsor of this amendment to ensure that it met the conceptual expectations But obviously, if we miss the mark, feel free to correct that. The next several pages continue boards and commissions for which there was no change by JAC, which brings us to page 84, which is the budget balancers and transfers. So subsection A, this is referred to as the allowance to move money from the budget reserve account for cash flow needs to the general fund. Subsection B provides for a statutory reserve amount in the amount of 5% of the forecast general fund revenue for the next biennium, $152,000. Starting with subsection C, these are all transfers approved by JAC. You approved $168 million from the general fund to SIPA, primarily to fund major maintenance and capital construction, but there are a couple of SCR programs that are also funded out of SIPA. Subsection D provides $100 million to the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund. And I will pause here just to think about two options. Right now, if we don't make any of these transfers, especially starting with D, effective immediate, you'll end up with a profile that will go out on the floors with some odd results. The total amount of money there is the same. You will have about $94 million available for the floors to spend on their own appropriations as of today. But some of it will be in 23, 24, and some of it will be in 25, 26. If you wanted to move it all into one place, so it all appears on one place. So when your colleagues are coming in and saying, I want an amendment for $100,000, right now we will have to ask them, do you want that effective immediate or on July 1? And every request will have to ask that because you've got a bunch of money in 3-4 available and a bunch of money in 5-6. One way to do that is make several of these transfers effective immediate. The downside with that is you're saving before you're spending, and that's a policy choice, but you're putting money in permanent funds before you're funding your budget. Another alternative is to go into last year's budget bill and change the amount of the tip to the LSRA to ensure that you have enough money to do anything you want, meaning it will carry over into the next biennium 23, 24 into 25, 26. So there are a couple of ways of addressing it. I just kind of leave that for your thought. If you wanted to do the transfer approach, my suggestion would be to make D, E, J, and M effective immediate, and we get within a couple $100,000. So all that 94 million will end up in 25, 26. If you want to do it the alternative approach, I'll bring in the section and ensure that all of the carryover that would have been dumped in the LSRA gets dumped in the general fund.
So Don, to make it effective immediately, I mean, it'd be nice to do, but presumably, obviously, there's funds there for it to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still sufficient funds to, as we appropriate in this budget for next year, there'll be sufficient funds unless we substantially modify the budget.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, this is somewhat important. You have more money in 23, 24 than we expect you will have in 25, 26. Bottom line, gas prices were higher last year, and we don't expect that anomaly to occur in the next 2 years. So you have excess funds in this biennium. What you do with them is your choice. If you do put those in savings early, the risk you run is Craig is wrong, which is not an insignificant risk. But let me just give you, 1 month doesn't mean a whole lot. But coal deliveries in the month of January from Wyoming mines were down 19% year over year. We're seeing a drop off that is pretty substantial. Well, when you're competing with low natural gas prices, coal does not compete well. So
And theoretically, there's inventory.
sure. Yep.
So you said D, E, and what was the other one?
D, E, J is in Jim, and M is in Mary.
And those
Mr.
total up to, in their respective accounts?
About $305 million.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Don, at the risk of making you repeat some of what you just said, if we make D, E, J, and M effective immediately, then we're less likely to a disconnect between what we said we're going to say and what we actually say if the Craig is off for 23-24. I'm sure I'm misstating it. So it sounds like the preferred way to deal with this is to make it effective immediate. But do you mind just explaining it one more time slowly and with feeling? Thank you.
If you do the savings and transfers first, you risk a downturn in the economy that would be challenging. So it does not prevent that. It makes it worse. But the advantage is it makes the transparency and communication to your colleagues much simpler. Weighing between those two. If there are other ways to fix it, and the second way, if you don't want to make those transfers immediately, which I understand, the downside is, hey, we have some money now, but we might not in 24 months, is to carry over a $305 million, and we can get the exact number, but roughly $305 million to the next biennium, rather than making that deposit into the LSRA. You get to the same point, a little bit safer under the second alternative.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
So if we carry it over, that means it's going to be sitting around in cash.
Yes.
If we can put it into savings now, I mean, theoretically, we'll have advantage of the higher markets. And so even if they put it in CDs or did something with it, they could get 4.5% or 5% interest for the next year and a half, and or then to invest it into long-term savings.
Mr. Chairman, all of that's correct.
And if the risk is 300 million for a downturn, yeah, the Elizabeth right now is at 1.4, right? So.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. Yes, I'm not advocating
No,
one.
I'm just trying to
Yep.
see the whole picture. So what if we did half? That complicates your life, but it's.
No, you could do half of option one and half of option two. No problem.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think we're ready to return to subsection E at the bottom of page 84. That's $190 million for the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund Reserve account. So this is part of the 5X approach. Subsection F is the newly created account, termed just what was said during the meeting, the Large School Capital Construction Holding Account. And this is $200 million deposit. This is cash moved into this account with the anticipation of future appropriations.
So Don, going back to E, the reason we picked 190 is to bring it up to or just exceeding 5X. And the reason we're doing that is because of the downturn in the market and the increase of the size of the fund.
Correct, with one caveat, the 190 million is not quite enough.
Not quite enough.
And then on the common school side, it's too much. But that's where the money is the problem, is you have more excess revenue on the school side than you do on the general fund side.
But if we're putting 100 million into the permanent mineral trust fund, we could turn that to 80 and
Good.
put more in the reserve account. So
Yes.
what's the number? To get to 5X on the.
Mr. Chairman, the amount needed to get all of the reserve accounts to the 5X, sorry, just trying to get,
I'm sorry, we just need the permanent mineral trust reserve account.
okay. The appropriation, Mr. Chairman, needed to get the PMTF reserve account to 5X is 111.4 million.
211 or 100?
111.4 million.
I'll have to work with her
Okay. All right, go ahead.
Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next subsection is $200 million deposit into the Common School Permanent Land Fund. This is the permanent corpus. This is not a reserve account. So you will see the language on this one is a little bit different because we can't just take money from the SFP and deposit it, but we can take FMRs that would have gone to the SFP and deposit those. So that's why it's a little bit unique. Subsection H is a $20 million deposit into the Wyoming's Tomorrow endowment. Subsection J is the $16.9 million deposit into Water One, exactly the amount that is being spent on the State Board of Control and State Engineer Operations.
So Don, on the, going back to F, the 200 million, that would occur at the end of the biennium?
It would occur when the state auditor, we did not specify any dates on these, is comfortable with the cash balance. So probably at the end, yes. And the reason I say that is you're making the $200 million FMRs that would start for fiscal year 25. So that would start July 1. My guess is the Department of Education and State Auditor's Office would not want to make the $200 million transfer until the end in order to avoid having to take out a loan for cash flow purposes.
So my question is, if we wanted them to trickle it in other words, to keep a reasonable balance, but not an overbalance, how would we word that?
You certainly could. I think under the current administration and both of those two departments, they really do an excellent job of looking at this on a quarterly basis and saying, hey, in fact, they just made some deposits in last year's bill based upon cash availability. So just as a quick example, this year we had 3 times where the federal government had a legitimate chance of being shut down, including on bond issuance back in June. And the State Budget Department, SAO, and the Department of Education did not make transfers during that questionable period. But now things are more settled. So you're seeing money flow into longer term investment accounts.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
just as a reminder as to why we created this account.
Which account?
Footnote F.
Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I'll answer that. This, on footnote F, top of page 85, the purpose of that is anticipation of a high school construction in Campbell County, a high school construction in Laramie County, and a high school construction in Sweetwater County, knowing that a high school of those sizes will probably cost in the neighborhood of 150 to 200 million each. And so, and need to occur probably in the next 6 to 8 years for all 3, if not sooner. And so this was just to start saving up to do those large high school projects.
And so, to follow up on that, Mr. Chairman, what was the wisdom in removing the school capital construction account before in the consolidation of those accounts? Did we not just create a new one? I know that will be the Senate's concern.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, I think you are correct in saying what you just said. Yes, we a year ago got rid of the school capital construction account and we recreated it here. The previous school capital construction account required legislative approval to appropriate out of it, just as this account does. So it's very similar, but I think the goal was to just start looking in the future. What are these large projects going to cost, and making sure we had the funding available at that point in time.
The next subsection for your consideration is subsection K. It's a $10 million deposit from the general fund to the Wyoming State Museum construction account. Subsection M provides a $1 million general fund deposit to the Capitol Square preservation account. And subsection N, this is the one that relates to Agency 91, the Stable Token Commission. And this is the general fund deposit of $5.8 million into that administration account. Section 301 provides for 2 borrowing authorities. The first is from the LSRA for management of cash flow by the state auditor. And the second is authorizes the governor to take a loan out for wildfires up to $20 million. Section 302 is time limited to the period of the budget, modifies the manner in which ADM is calculated. Specifically, for the next 2 years, students participating in 75% of a full-time equivalency basis will be counted as full-time as opposed to 80%. Section 303 provides for carryover appropriations. Subsection A is for infrastructure for the governor's office. We've talked about several of these, so I'll move pretty quickly. Subsection B is disaster contingency, $1.3 million. We talked at length about the public defender capital case. That's in subsections C and D. Subsection E is for acoustics, that $1 million appropriation to the state construction department 2 years ago. And then subsection F, we also spoke about, this is allowing the Wyoming Community College Commission to use up to $912,000 from its health insurance carryover for the specified IT operations. The last item here is a technical correction. We will ask that this section after the Chancery Court, Chancery Court of $947,000 in the bottom of page 92. We also spoke about that. We have a technical correction on this page where the section itself needs to be made effective immediately on the entire section.
For section 303.
For section 303, we'll just make a new H after G and make the whole section immediate. Technically, they're supposed to revert on June 30th. And then if this carryover isn't effective until July 1, right. So we have a day issue we need to include. On section 304, these are employee benefits. These are not actual changes in any rates for employees, but it rather sets a maximum amount for different family types and their insurance coverage. All of these have been updated and were included in your section 300 handout in January. Subsection B at the bottom of page 94, this is where the retiree health insurance gets moved. It is requested by the state auditor and gets moved into this subsection in the amount of $2.3 million. This is for pre-July 1, 2008 retirees to make contributions to their health insurance, both for those who are Medicare eligible and not Medicare eligible. Section 305 is rather static. This is the governor's flex authority. The big change on this is you added the Department of Environmental Quality to the superflex agencies. Previously, it was only Department of Health and Department of Corrections. That takes us to page 98, which is the judicial flex, and no changes are made in that section. Section 307 is the limitation on the transfer from 900 series to 100 series with several exemptions. Again, the Department of Environmental Quality, Health, and Corrections, as well as any other agency or footnote that specifies such, and there are 3 of those. The State Budget Department for purposes of grants management, the Attorney General for purposes of SecOps, I think that's YDOT for purposes of SecOps, and Public Defender for purposes of contract or full-time attorneys for their caseload.
Don,
So-
just, I'm sorry, go back, but just for clarification on the funding under employee benefits and the benefits to those retirees. That's just repeat language from the prior budget.
It is.
Carrying on.
That amount of the appropriation goes down, frankly, because of
Less.
exactly.
True. But we've been doing it for a while.
You've been doing it since 2008?
Go ahead.
Don, could you remind me on the employee benefits on section 304. We adjust that, but did we change the percentage amounts employees versus what the state pays for? Did that change over the last biennium?
It didn't over the last biennium. I think it was 3 years ago. And I believe it was 1585 and it moved to 1882, meaning 18% by the employee, 82% by the state. And it used to be 85% by the state. So it got reduced by about 3 percentage points. And I think that occurred about 3 years ago.
Thank you.
I think we are now on section 308, which is page 100. Nothing wrong with this, but it is a little bit weird. Section 308 is the major maintenance funding. You'll recall the state construction department left out $6 million in their budget request, and you restored that as an error. The oddity there is $162 million is from the SIPA account and $6 million is from the general fund. Well, you didn't have enough money in the SIPA account, so the motion was it works. I mean, there's no harm, no foul. There are a couple of additional changes on this section, including subsection E is a carve out of an additional $100,000 of general funds for purposes of major maintenance at Ranch A. And then subsection F, which basically strikes out everything from B through D if your bill sponsored by this committee on major maintenance is adopted, then we don't need to put subsections B, D, or B, C, and D in future budgets.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to the top of page 100, the $6 million, if we were to include a few pages previous, we make a transfer from general fund to SIPA. If we were to increase that from the 168 million, I believe it is there, to 174 rounded number, then we wouldn't need to have this 6 million here because then we'd have enough to cover. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that would make things a little simpler and cleaner if we made a higher transfer there and not do it here.
You're exactly correct, Representative. And we thought about doing that, but it seemed like a step too far for a staff change, but yes.
Mr. Chairman, will you make a note so that when we get to making amendments that I would like to make that one at that point in time?
And so what would the number be? Would it be 6.5? Would it be 7? Would it be 6?
$6,097,947.
But should we leave a little flex?
No, because that's the exact amount of the appropriation. So it's not an unknown number. It's a known number.
Just that number.
Yep. I think we're on page 104, section 310. This is the limitation on the 100 series. So you'll recall several agencies exceeded their amount on this, and they came before you with an exception request on their reclassification of employees or increase in compensation. Section 311 is concurrence with the governor's biennial budget development. We use this language to avoid a whole lot of footnotes. If he says it's one time and you didn't change it to ongoing, it's still one time. Basically, you're just concurring with everything he said unless you specify otherwise in your prior footnotes. You do have one addition to this section, and that's on line 16. You don't appropriate or authorize at-will employees. You appropriate part-time and full-time employees. So if there is a request for a continuation that you did not deny, and you didn't deny this one, then you are also agreeing with the governor on at-will employees. Next, section 312.
Sorry, John, I apologize. Did we skip 309 or did I accidentally fall asleep? Thank you.
Oh, we did skip 309. I apologize. And this is important. Section 309, I apologize. This is an authorization to carry over funds from the Department of Health. You have authorized the 4 potential uses on page 103, lines 12 through 21. They are not prioritized. The discretion lies with the director of the department, but can only be used for those four purposes: the state hospital demolition account, the Medicaid expenditures, Title 25, and state facility staffing needs. There is a technical correction to this, and that is to grab $13 million that was not addressed in the 23-20 or 21-22 biennium, which can be added to this to ensure that, for example, there will be sufficient funds to do all 1 through 4. Sorry about that. I think we're now on section 312.
Go ahead.
I think the intent of moving the carryover appropriations from 21-22 was to be specific to the demolition account. Yeah. With authority to use it.
With that, I think we're ready to go to section 312. So prior to section 312, these were all fairly standard section 300s. They appeared in prior budgets. Beginning with section 312, this is new stuff, meaning you can't go back to last year and find it. So the first new thing that JAC did is you appropriated $8 million for matching funds to each of the 8 community colleges, including Gillette Community College, provide for matching gifts, and the treasurer to allocate those funds upon an accumulated gift of at least $10,000. Then on page 107, subsection C, there's what I'll call the competitive pool of $1.3 million that was left over of this $9.3 million. Any college that finishes its $1 million allocation is eligible for the competitive pool of $1.3 million. Then on April 1st, 2026, the committee said 2 years. So we wanted to include this before the expiration of this bill. That's why the choice of April 1st. Any college that was unable to match their funds, that money goes into another pool and is available for competition among any college that can do it. So they basically have 2 years to generate some matching funds. If they're unable to do it, then another college has access to their unmatched funds. Where did this money come from? It won't be in this bill. So the section at the end here on top of page 108, lines 5 through 6 are worth noting. If the capital construction bill somehow fails, these matching funds would go away. The reason being, there's a link between those two. The money that was funding these matching funds comes from the reversion of the CWC Jackson Outreach Center grant funds, with the exception of $1 million that was retained for the Jackson facility. So they got to retain $1 million at Jackson. Everything else went into this pool. But if that CapCon bill fails for some reason, there's no ability to put money in this pool. Okay, if there's no...
Mr. Chairman, it's so important to understand that this isn't new money. There was money that was set aside. ARPA's going to go ahead and pay, we think, for the most of Jackson. So we're just reallocating that within that community college community, except for the 1 million that they'll retain in case they need it at Jackson. Is that right?
That's exactly correct. Yep.
And so the question is, if the CapCon bill fails, do we have another alternative?
If the CapCon bill fails, you would need to take this out of LSRA or the general fund. Those are your available options. So you definitely could strike this and say, we don't want to give $94 million to the floor. We want to give 85.
So that money, that 10 million, why does that have to go through CapCon? It was appropriated through CapCon, I understand that, but now what's in that account, is that the only way to
I believe it's the only way to, because, and when you see the CapCon bill, we're actually not in full bringing in that section, but we have to have some mechanism to go in and amend that.
Thank you. Mr. Paul.
Go ahead.
So following up that question, it's not possible to bring that section of that old CapCon bill into this budget bill and amend it here versus in our CapCon bill this year.
That's correct. However, this conversation has brought up another option, which is, okay, what if we don't bring up that language from the prior bill and amend it? What if we creatively repeal it? Then it's just a repeal of an appropriation for whatever purpose. It did not matter. I'll have to talk to Brian and Tamara about whether using, and if they're listening in, what I'm contemplating is just moving section 8 of CapCon bill into section 338 of the budget bill, and they can think about that.
Thank you.
The next section is the school capital construction. This has been in the budget bill for a few years. The meat of this section appears on beginning on the bottom of page 110. It's subsection J. Romanet 1 provides $2.2 million for leases. Romanet 2 provides $52,000 for modular buildings. Romanet 3 provides $20.6 million for design of 3 schools. Romanet 4 provides for $91 million of construction of 5 schools. And you will see the addition on line 8, page 112 of the legislative priority for Teton High School. That was added. So you'll see that priority looks different. It doesn't follow the numerical scheme because it wasn't a commission priority. Subsection 5, paragraph 5, provides for component funding in the amount of $25 million. Paragraph 6 provides for funding non-education building design. You'll see all these 3 facilities are transportation facilities. Paragraph 7 provides for non-educational construction in the amount of $27.3 million. Again, this is construction of 3 transportation facilities. Romanet 8, or paragraph 8, provides for $2.6 million for demolition. Paragraph 9 provides for $3.5 million for a transfer. This is the Natrota County School, and the proceeds are deposited in the school foundation program. In theory, this should be a net to zero. However, there could be some administrative expenses related to the transaction, filing the deed or a survey or that sort of thing. Paragraph 10 provides for $1 million for consultants. And then paragraph 11 provides for $10 million of unanticipated costs.
$10 million for unanticipated costs. And then subparagraph number 12 is the Buckle School, the $300,000. We do have a staff item here to make a note that was pointed out that we did not include subsection 12 and subsection 11. So that is just a simple cleanup just to make sure that they're included in those unanticipated costs as well.
Meaning we'll reword this, but what Elizabeth is pointing to is on page 114, line 18. We just need to insert the words and 12, XII, but we will probably renumber them so they all fall in order. So you won't have, J3 through 10 and 6 and of this subsection. But we just missed a site.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The 6% of the 300,000 in Romanet 12, is that amount already included in line 20, the 10.4 million?
Representative Walters, yes, it is.
So if we wanted to remove that roughly $18,000 from the 10 million, we could remove it there and then just not include it, saying that 300,000 is all they get, period.
That is correct.
No inflation. Thank you.
Section 314 is the second cap on severance tax distribution. So the current statute provides 1/3 of severance taxes over that first cap goes to the general fund and 2/3 goes to the BRA or the budget reserve account. This secondary cap says any amount over the January Craig estimate, that's what those numbers mean. Any amount over the January Craig estimate is split 1/3 to the general fund, just as it is now, 1/3 to the BRA instead of 2/3. And then the winner in this is on the top of page 116, the 1/3 to the school foundation program reserve account. That's the beneficiary of all of this language. They would benefit from 1/3 of the amount over the Craig estimate. Similarly, section 315 does a secondary cap for the federal mineral royalty distribution. Under current law, 1/3 would go to the school foundation program and 2/3 would go to the budget reserve. The subsection O on page 117 provides for anything over the January Craig forecast, 40% rather than 33 1/3% goes to the SFP, and 60% rather than 66.6% would go to the budget reserve account. So education gets a little bit extra of anything unforecasted. Section 316, this is the University of Wyoming Research Matching Funds. I think folks are well aware of the program, but I will refrain from mentioning the potential grant applicant here. This is for $75 million. This is not new money. So this money comes from a repealer at the very end of the bill in section 399. We repeal $80 million in the old section 327, and $75 million of that is dedicated to this Wyoming research project. And the limitations were a conceptual amendment, I believe, largely by Senator Kinski in writing and then in concept by Chairman Nicholas. So we wanted to ensure that we met your expectations regarding the progress and all parties successfully meeting the conditions of the partnership agreement. That language appears on the middle of page 118, lines 10 through 15. And through some review of this, while we did capture the specific language that the motion was made, it may be a little bit more clear on line 20 after up to, if the words "an additional" were added. There may be some question whether it's 30 million and then it goes back to 20 million, 30 million and then an additional 20 million and then the remainder. So we might prompt you for that if you feel similarly that the insertion of those two words make it clear that it's by June 30th, 2025 would be up to 50 million total. Paragraph 1 on the top of page 119 provides for the approval process. The University of Wyoming Board of Trustees would have to approve the expectations, timelines, contributions, and intended outcomes. Paragraph 2, and to Senator Kinski, this is the language for the in-kind match, not just a cash match. Paragraph 3 provides for the director of the Center for Innovation and Flow through Porous Media approval, as well as all university authority, signature authority in their regulations. Paragraphs 4, 5, and 6 only provide for fairly standard research terminology now that indicate that the practical research, the studies, the small scale experiments should be done by Wyoming residents, Wyoming students, and on Wyoming properties, and which is language that has been involved in other Wyoming research, UW research. Paragraph 7 is important because this is all then subject to the governor's approval. So that is worth noting as well. And then finally, a subsection D indicates that this is not an ongoing project. and that the funds are effective immediate in subsection E. So the $75 million is not new money. It's already appropriated, so the money is there. That's why it's effective immediately. Section 317, if there are no questions on section 316, this is the FPO. This is the flameless pressurized oxy-combustion technology. Boy, this one is not easy either. Apologies. This is a repeal of an appropriation made in 2021. The appropriation was made in the amount of $12 million to the University of Wyoming. The University of Wyoming did not capture the DOE grant that was specified as a condition of that $12 million. So they transferred these funds to the Wyoming Energy Authority. The challenge with that is the Wyoming Energy Authority is outside of the state system. They have that $12 million invested in a private institution as they wish, the proceeds of which the interest income is available to the Wyoming Energy Authority and outside of the process of appropriation. They are an instrumentality of the state, not an agency of the state. They then spent $2.6 million of the $12 million for the purposes specified in the footnote, rare earths, related to WRI, which is the Western Research Institute. Well, now the request is to change the purposes of the footnote. So I'm kind of just saying what section 317 does is unwind the last 3 years of work. So we unwind it, they give it all back. We can't reappropriate those funds because those funds are not in the state's possession to reappropriate. So we unwind all that, get it back in the state auditor's office, and then reappropriate it for the original purposes, except for we take WRI out and we expand the purposes for which rare earth pilot processing facility or rare earth element research demonstrations can be used on. So we really are only adding those 8 or 9 words, but it takes a couple of pages to accomplish it. Okay. Section 318. This is the revisions to the 4 prior sections. So I know on the floor you're going to say, first of all, we hire budget fiscal staff to work with numbers and they can't count. On page 122, you will see section 318, and then they go to section 321. Well, they're skipped 3. Section 319, which everyone is expecting, appears on page 127, line 12. Everything between page 122 and 127 is within section 318 and being amended. So we're bringing in old budgetary sections. The first one we bring in is section 321. This is for energy matching funds, and we're adding $5 million. That's the $5 million that came from section 327 from last year's matching funds, total of 80 million. 5 million went here, 75 million went to the UW research. The other thing that was added is on page 123, line 7, we added the term critical minerals. There was some discussion that says, oh, should it be critical materials or critical minerals? And also, should we cite the DOE regulations that define critical minerals? We've concluded that the term critical minerals is actually a term of art, and people know what that means without referencing the DOE regulations. Furthermore, we did side on the air of liberalness in the interpretation of this rather than conservative. And by that, I mean DOE determines critical minerals, DOI, Department of Interior, excuse me, I have that reversed. DOI determines critical minerals, DOE determines critical materials. And there are some elements that are included on one and not the other. So we went with the largest, most expansive critical minerals list, which happens to be the DOI list. You will see that lithium is being removed in lines 12 through 18. That was a carve out to section 321 last year. And that is being removed. And then we are extending this total of $155 million shall not revert until June 30, 2027. That appears on the top of page 124. The next section that is being amended is section 325. This is the infrastructure program. There are 3 things going on here. One, at the request of the governor's office, not only does a potential applicant need this money to qualify, they can use it to directly match, even if it's not necessarily to qualify. So this broadens the scope of this appropriation. Second, in subsection E, you are carving out $24.5 million for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. This was a request in the governor's letter. We would normally see this in OSLI and DEQ. It's found here for that pollution control revolving loan account. And finally, in subsection F, you're extending the date on this by 2 years. Rather than the current sunset date of June 30th, 2024, it now expires in 2026.
But Don, would it be fair to say that the fund, this is the funds that we're appropriating to secure additional funds, which then will reside in DEQ and OSLI?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Don, what was the rationale for moving 24 million of the 75 over to the revolving water pollution fund?
I don't want to speak for the committee, but my understanding is the governor asked for general funds and the committee wanted to conserve general funds for other purposes and saw these unused funds and elected to fund it that way. But you could characterize it differently.
Gotcha. Thank you.
The next section within 318 that is being amended is section 333, and this is the Community Facility and Rehabilitation Program. All that's being done here is you're eliminating subsection B and moving all of the funds into subsection A. What does this mean for practical purposes? It means that about $2.7 million will, $2.8 million will not go through the generic business council purposes and will be subject to the community facility program. So that's the change here. You used to have about half of that money was in an independent program and half of it was through the community facilities program. And now all of it is going through the community facilities program. I don't know all of the details here, but just to put something on the record, I understood subsection A was outside of the program for purposes of the old Stony. I don't know whether that would be impacted by the consolidation of these or not.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, my understanding when I visited with the director is that it was the other projects that came that were easier to comply with. It. Oh, Stony was in there, but then there were some other projects that qualified. I think one in being considered in Laramie, one up in Sheridan County, and they felt that it was just easier to combine them all together. So that was my take. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The next section for your consideration is the unmet housing needs, section 334. And not only are you extending this program for 2 years, you modified the permissible uses and include land acquisition and specified for unmet housing and workforce housing. This entire section, because we're modifying prior law, is effective immediate, and that appears on page 127, line 8. The employee compensation section is next, section 319. The committee approved $5.9 million, but directed this only for vacant positions to bring them up to 90% of market or comparable market pay. Here is another staff comment on page 127, line 21. We would ask that you remove the term judicial branch and. The judicial branch was not included in the $5.9 million. I have reached out to them, and given your action on their independent compensation requests, they do not need these funds either. Section 320 provides $150,000 to the state auditor's office for an external consultant to audit and review the methodology for performance compensation, along with the benchmarks and prior calculations. Section 321 provides $25,000. We place this in the state auditor's office for a review and upgrade and potential replacement of the state's budget management and reporting system. We did work with the state auditor's office on the language, and at their request included the following criteria to scope the work, including the financial and non-financial costs, opportunities for enhanced efficiency, interoperability across other systems, and the availability of transparent information among the users.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Don, you worked with the auditor's office on this language. Is the 25,000 an adequate number, or did they say, wow, we'll never get all of this done for that amount, or did they indicate one way or the other?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, they did not indicate one way or the other, but they didn't push back. I think the cost to implement something would be substantially more than 25,000.
Thank
you. Section 322 is a continuation of the Rocky Mountain Power Project account, according to testimony of the agency, in this case, Wildlife Natural Resource Trust Fund Agency. I think this will only need to be in the budget one more biennium, and this will be exhausted. This is a continuation from last year. Section 323 is new language. This is a new, unlike the prior sections, this is new language, new appropriation of $200 million from the LSRA for large energy matching projects, large defined as the state's contribution equal to at least $50 million as specified on the top of page 132. And Representative Zwanitzer's amendment appears in subsection D on the bottom of page 131. No award shall be granted that would obligate the state to any future financial commitment beyond the amount of the initial award. Those were the additional amendments, and subsection F requires notice by the governor to Management Council and the Joint Appropriations Committee. Section 324, this is the authorization for the sale of a state parcel for not less than $100 million. This is shaped in the manner of an appropriation to the common school account within the permanent land fund of those proceeds resulting from the sale of the specified parcel. That parcel is described for legal purposes on page 133, subsection C.
Please. Dawn, if I could go back to page 132, subsection F there, starting on line 6, that new language there on the governor reporting to us on large projects. That is new language there, and that reflects back to page 124 on the old section 325, where that subsection B on line 21 was removed. That was a requirement for the same purpose of funds, the large project funds, to report. But now that that's no longer the large project fund source, we moved that language over to this new section. Is that correct?
Representative Larson, Mr. Chairman, very close.
Okay.
It is identical language that appeared in both the infrastructure and energy matching funds from last year. That part is correct.
That's the infrastructure funds.
Yeah.
There you go, 325.
The 325, the little correction I would make to your explanation is on page 124, subsection B.
There you go.
That's that B11 process, and that was a request by the governor's office to remove that language because some of the recipients were communities, airport boards, and were not subject to the B11. So that's why that language got struck. Okay, section 325, if there are no further questions, this provides for $5 million for employer-paid retirement contributions in the amount of 0.5% or 0.5% of the member's salary for both years of the biennium. We applied this to all state employees, and you will see the definition of state employees on page 134, lines 11 through 14, including brand inspections because they are unique contract employees. And this also applies to all branches of government and higher education institutions. So this does apply to the executive, judicial, legislative branches, as well as UW and community colleges. This is an appropriation of general funds, and to the extent other funds, meaning federal or tuition and fees, are used, those employees would receive the same benefits. Subsection E makes this effective only if your bill increasing the the retirement contribution rates is enacted. If that bill goes away, this appropriation goes away. In addition, they don't quite line up. So I want to make that clear. Your bill provides for an increase of rates in the amount of 0.25 and then 0.5. You've actually over appropriated a little to the amount of about $1.2 million by making this employer contribution 0.5 and 0.5. So there will be a slight benefit to the employee for their current contribution because you've overfunded this a bit. So I just want everyone to be aware, and I think there might be a proposal to address that.
And you want to run through the numbers?
So Mr. Chairman, it sticks in my mind that the actual needs are around 3.8 or something to the matter. We could probably reduce this down to 4 million instead of 5 and achieve the desired outcome that maybe we could consider when we do the amendments.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay.
Section 326 is quite.
Mr. Co-Chair, I have a question for Don. Don, I guess I'm unclear as to why this language is here. Shouldn't this be in Senate File 67, or is it also in Senate File 67?
So it is not in Senate File 67, and I really don't want to speak for the committee. However, what I will say is you had already adopted, and frankly, Senate File 67 is numbered by the time you took up the governor's letter on this topic. So it could be struck and added to Senate File 67. That is certainly a possibility.
Thank you.
Section 326 is the action on enterprise inflation. Round numbers, the governor asked for 43 million. You approved about 70% of that, or $28 million at the top of Section 326. I won't go through each of the agencies that are benefiting from this and the funds that they are benefiting, but you will recall all of these were the inflation requests that were not based upon actual expenditure methodology, meaning these were negotiated rates. A great example of that is the University of Wyoming. This appears on line 24 of page 135, where they had a $4.5 million increase in their entire block grant for purposes of inflation. That was not based upon any Wolf's analysis. That was based upon a negotiation or discussion with that agency. Another great example, which we've already talked about earlier today, appears on page 135, line 16, in the amount of $8 million. This relates to the motor vehicle pool over at the Department of Administration and Information. Again, these are all of the inflation requests that were not related to their study of actual expenditures. With that, Section 327 is the Wyoming's Tomorrow Kickstart Program. The Wyoming's Tomorrow does not become effective until there's $50 million in the corpus. There is currently $30 million in the corpus, $31 million in the corpus. This $2.5 million would be used for purposes of the next biennium non-traditional student scholarships. Finally, Section 399 is the repealed section, and I do want to address a few of these. The first two, 2020 session laws, Chapter 80, Section 2, Section 067, as amended by 21, Chapter 69, Section 2, 067, That's the FPO, the flameless pressurized oxy. That's the $12 million that is now going to be used on rare earths that's associated with the Wyoming Energy Authority. Both of those. The next one, which is the 2023 Wyoming Session Laws, Chapter 94, Section 2, Section 48, footnote 13. This is the Wyoming Department of Health $39 million reversion into the state hospital demolition account. This is being repealed because now it's only $15 million. So we had to go back and take that out. And then finally, the last provision is Section 327, which we've talked about several times. This is the $80 million originally appropriated in the 2023 session for energy or infrastructure matching fund. That 327 is going away, and $5 million is going to energy matching funds, and $75 million is going to the UW research project.
Okay, any other questions on our new draft budget? Okay, seeing none. Don, anything else?
I don't. I do have a list of those staff points, which I've raised. I think I caught all of them as I walked through the bill, and any amendments that you wanted to take up as well. I think I have a number of those.
Okay, so it's 12 o'clock. Let's take about a 10-minute break. And Senate members on the screen, let's go off mainstream so we can have a conversation about the rest of the amendments and how our next step of the procedures. So we don't know yet. So what to talk about. Okay, we'll be in recess for 10 minutes, but stay. So can we then go offline and